Chapter 1198. Aina felt a crushing feeling in her chest, her vision going dark for a moment. She wasn't quite sure how to breathe or even think any longer. Her hands slipped from Lionel, her arms no longer seeming to have the strength to hold on. Her knees grew weak, and an imbalance she would have easily been able to correct in her peak condition was her undoing. She fell to her butt, her vision blurred and her mind foggy. The wind seemed to be sucked out of the arena, a response no one could have expected falling to their ears. However, the silence that followed didn't last very long at all. "I'll kill you." The enraged roar shook the arena even more violently than anything Aina could have done. The golden barrier of force directly shattered in one location, forming an enormous hole as a streak of crimson tore a path out from it, the furious howl of a father penetrating the skies. Lionel didn't even have the time to turn his head in that direction. All he could do was stir his lineage factor, his bronze runes vibrating to life in full force and a halo wafting with violet fog appearing above his head. Bang! The fist threatened to collapse an entire side of Lionel's face. Visit. For a better user experience, the skin of Lionel's cheek splintered, the bone beneath cracking, and his eye on that side went completely blind. His body went limp for a moment, his brain rattling around his skull like an unleashed ping-pong ball before he shot out from his position like a speeding bullet. The wind howled and whistled, much of what remained of Lionel's shirt shearing apart beneath the pressure. Before Lionel even landed at his new location, Meal violently coughed up a mouthful of blood. But he completely ignored the feeling of his inner organs shearing to pieces as he prepared to launch an even more powerful attack. Much of his momentum and force had been dissipated by the golden barrier, and his own injuries which had yet to heal definitely didn't help. But all he could see was red. If he didn't kill this boy right here and now, he wouldn't know what to do with himself. Bang! Lionel crashed into the golden barrier, his entire body suddenly becoming racked by a wave of pain. Wave after wave surged through him as he felt his bones snap one after another. Even after using his runes to disperse the impact and spread it throughout himself, the result was just more of his body being torn apart. His one good eye, however, continued to look forward, a frosty light hidden within them as they watched Meal preparing to jump forward one more time. The look within those pale violet depths could only be described as malevolent. A smoldering abyssal valley of darkness and destruction. Even as Lionel coughed up several mouthfuls of blood, it never wavered. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ng experience, just as Meal was about to bound forward one more time, though, an almost shrieking shout called out, stopping him in his tracks. Stop. Stop it right now. Aina's voice caught Meal completely off guard. The fury in his gaze hadn't even waned in the slightest, even meeting Lionel's cold gaze over a distance of several hundred meters. He wanted nothing more than to tear this boy limb from limb. If you hurt him again, I'll never forgive you. Aina spoke with what strength she had left. Please take me away, I don't want to be here anymore. Lionel slid down from the golden barrier, a few cracks quickly mending in his wake. An entire side of his face had become a swollen monstrosity, but the other side maintained a cold indifference that continued to meet Meal's gaze. Meal's body shook with rage. But, when he felt his daughter weakly tugging at his robes, he couldn't help but feel his own heart breaking. There was no rage worth leaving his daughter in this state. He turned his gaze from Lionel, sweeping his daughter into his arms. He sent a glance backward, the crimson in his eyes glowing and his flowing red hair seemingly having become a raging dragon of its own. The oppressive atmosphere in the air seemed to grow palpable. It only became more so after Meal reached out a hand, causing the Brazinger family's heirloom to snap into his palm. In those moments, it felt like the reappearance of a warlord. There was no doubt that had Meal had this blade in his hand, he could have single-handedly wiped the Viola family from existence. Visit. For a better user experience with a step, he vanished from his location, shooting through the rapidly closing gap in the barrier. Lionel could feel his face and body healing exceptionally slowly. There was no doubt in his mind that this was simply the difference between being attacked by a being in the same dimension as you versus one in a higher dimension. Despite the fact most of Meal's strength had been dispersed by the barrier and the fact he was heavily injured, Lionel had still ended up like this. A chorus of boos began to rain down from above. If it wasn't for the barriers, there would likely be a lot of things thrown in Lionel's direction as well. But his gaze continued looking ahead in the same direction, as though Meal was still standing in the same spot. The rage of the crowd only grew with each passing moment. They vented all their fury and frustration. When what Lionel did sunk in, they became almost feral. Lionel, though, couldn't seem to hear any of it. He had an anger bubbling up within him, but he didn't know where it was coming from. He thought that maybe it was because of Meal, but with his impeccable memory he knew that this anger had been bubbling within him even before Aina's father's outburst. No matter how hard he thought, putting every single one of his split minds to work, he couldn't understand why, and it only made him angrier. Fuck. Lionel's shout was sudden and completely unexpected, drowning out the crowd as though they weren't even there. The barrier to his back shattered and soon after, he vanished, leaving the arena entirely. The latest _AP_SODIES are on the website. Chapter 1199. Lionel's fists fell like a torrential storm. He stood within a cave carved by his own fists, his rage only seeming to become worse with each passing moment. Lionel couldn't ever remember being this absolutely furious before. Every time he tried to consider why that was, he just couldn't pinpoint it, and it fueled his tirade even more. A violent crimson aura hung around him, suffocating his violet fog. The killing intent was so thick and viscous that even the six-dimensional creatures in the surroundings didn't dare to get close. Bang! 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 Blood flew from Lionel's fists and his lips, his body having come nowhere close to healing from Meal's strike. To make matters worse, the mountains of planet Montax were known for their hardness, even to the point they could grow to a height of piercing into space without faltering. Yet, Lionel's fists kept wailing, a harsh and grating whistle emitting from them every time he slammed forward. It was stupid. It was all so stupid. That was the perfect opportunity to use the spider construct on her father, yet he missed it. She was a warrior, maybe even more powerful than himself, yet he had turned her away. Her words had been sincere, and even if he didn't care for them, shouldn't he have at least respected them? Visit. For a better user experience, he couldn't think clearly. His mind was covered in a haze and he couldn't line up his beliefs properly. He was absolutely furious, but he didn't even have a target. He simply kept punching the walls of these mountains. His lungs were screaming, his limbs were on fire, and his bones couldn't even properly heal under the strain he was putting them under. The cave only grew deeper and deeper. Lionel was absolutely relentless, and he didn't even seem to show any signs of slowing down. But while his mind was at one gear, his body was at a completely different one. No matter how much fuel his mind had, his body wasn't in a state where it could keep up. Bang! Lionel's mind tried to pull his body along, forcing it to break into Tier 4. But that was when he rammed into a wall. His feet faltered, his fist missing the wall before him and his body falling to his knees. He tried to stand, but it all suddenly hit him like a ton of bricks. Breathing felt like he was swallowing hot coals, and his blood rushed through his body like molten metal. He coughed and wheezed, mouthfuls of blood and pieces of flesh coming from his lips. Lionel's vision swam, but his mind was still in overdrive. After receiving so much rest over the past few days, it had far too much energy. Even if he wanted to pass out, he couldn't do it, let alone the fact he wanted to continue furiously swinging his fists. The latest _AP_SODIES are on the website. It was right at that moment that he suddenly felt a palm touch his back. Even in the state his mind was in, he hadn't been able to sense anything before it approached. His head snapped backward, but when he saw what was behind him, his mind went completely blank. It was a woman he had impossibly clear memories of. Those twinkling emerald eyes were all too familiar, filled with warmth and unconditional affection. The cave Lionel's fists had excavated already traveled more than 100 meters in, shrouding everything in complete darkness. And yet, her light smile radiated a light of its own. Alienor kneeled by her son's side, her brows furrowed in worry. She had been fretting over every tiny detail about how she would face her son again, but in the end, her motherly instinct won out. Even if Lionel hated her, she couldn't continue to watch out without doing anything. Seeing the violent aura around her son and the deep crimson taking over his irises, she couldn't help but react this way. What she had never expected, though, was for that violent crimson to vanish almost the instant he laid eyes on her, his eyes even watering. Mom? Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ing experience, all the reflexes in the world couldn't have prepared Eleanor. She found her son's arms being tightly wound around her, causing her to enter a state of shock for a long while. But soon after, she was on cloud 9. Not only had her son recognized her instantly, he didn't seem angry in the slightest. There wasn't even a bit of hesitation in him at all. Eleanor wrapped her arms around her son. Feeling the state of his body, she nearly couldn't hold back her own tears. When it came to how Eleanor and Velasco wanted to raise their son, they were practically at two opposite sides of the aisle. Velasco would let Lionel jump into a vat of boiling oil even if he knew it was a mistake. He thought that Lionel needed to grow on his own. Even when it came to the treasures he left behind for Lionel, all of them could only slowly unlock their potential under Lionel's own efforts. Eleanor, though, would lock Lionel away in a safe room with padded cushions for walls if she could have. The treasures she gave Lionel were instantly valuable and far beyond what even most large families would give their children. If they saw their son in such a state, Velasco would probably force Lionel to heal on his own. Eleanor, though, couldn't possibly wait for such a thing and instantly began to use her snow force on him. Meal's influence vanished like a fragrance in the wind, Lionel's body quickly returning to its peak state in just a few breaths of time. However, his grip on his mother only tightened. The latest _AP_SODIes are on the website. Eleanor sighed, rubbing her son's back. Though there was a silence between them, Eleanor could feel the heaviness of Lionel's spirit. Eleanor might not have been there, but she had still watched her son grow up. She knew well that even when Lionel lost his temper, this wasn't how he reacted. "Do you regret it?" Eleanor finally asked. Chapter 1200. Lionel didn't answer for a very long time. For a moment, Eleanor began to worry about the same thing her own mother had. Had she been away from Lionel's life for too long to be able to ask such a question? Should she have waited longer? But the result wasn't what she thought it would be. "I regret how I did it." Lionel's voice was still somewhat hoarse. When he pulled back from his mother's embrace and leaned back against the walls of the cave he had created, a flickering sort of indecision was still within his gaze. He still couldn't understand. "How you did it?" Eleanor probed. Despite her streak as a clean freak, something she seemed to have only passed on to her son in part, if it was for Lionel, she didn't mind sitting on these dirty floors. There was no need to be so cruel. "I don't know why I did that." The words came out before I could even control them. I just don't think I want to be with her anymore and didn't want to give her an opportunity. But I should have figured out another way." "You don't?" Eleanor looked deeply at her son. Lionel's rage seemed to be fueled by something other than what he said. But she couldn't tell exactly what that was. That said, his statement was as clear as day. "Visit. For a better user experience, my mind is too clear and my path is too straight without her. I've made more progress in just a few days than I used to make in months. My head used to be filled with thoughts of her and even the lens I saw the world through was filtered through her first. But when I let go, everything improved." "And that's what you want? To follow your path over everything else?" "It's not what I want. It's what needs to happen." Lionel closed his eyes. "This world is filled with nothing but trash. Maybe I was angry because today I became one of them." Eleanor's expression softened even more considerably than it did before, her finger gliding over her son's forehead and fixing the sweaty strands of his hair. "And what is your goal?" "To unite the dimensional verse," Lionel said softly. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. Even with his eyes closed, Eleanor could sense the determination of her son. It's quite stupid, isn't it? That's what she said, anyway. Lionel continued. But maybe it is. I left the arena today even though I know how important getting into the Void Palace is, and I don't even feel like appearing for the third day of the selections, not that they would even allow me to make it past. Lionel felt like an idiot. His mistakes compounded. Now he had let himself down and he couldn't even enter the Void Palace anymore. Great on his part, really. Top tier. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ng experience. Eleanor smiled and shook her head. Her son was clearly still unaware that the tokens were all in her hands. She flipped over a palm and a gem of shimmering amethyst appeared. It was carved into the shape of a coin the size of a palm. On its body, a dark and brooding palace could be seen. Lionel's eyes snapped open. He could feel a strong might coming from the token, a might that could only come from a higher dimensional material. Just looking at it, it was at least on the same level as the memory or Uncle Montez had given him, if not beyond. This is the amethyst token. Mom can give it to you, but you have to promise not to tell your father. Head throw a fit. Lionel was stunned for a moment before he began to laugh. His laugh was in one part ironic, another part because he truly found the situation to be funny, and a final part sad. This world was truly unfair. Who knew how many were risking their lives for a chance to grasp this amethyst token, yet his mother was handing it to him without him having proved anything. Did Lionel think he could get the token on his own? Yes. But it didn't make a difference to him at all. After all, even if he did earn it the normal way, he would have to rely on talent he was lucky to be born with to do so anyway. Of course, Eleanor didn't care about all of that. She wasn't exactly sane when it came to matters related to her son. Maybe the only reason Emil still had a head on his shoulders was because Eleanor's heart softened for that little girl. But, even then, she didn't reprimand her son. Luckily, it seemed that Lionel was aware of his own mistakes. Visit. For a better user experience, Lionel took the token, moving it between his fingers. It carried a great heft to it. Can you give this to her? Lionel asked. Eleanor blinked. Are you sure? Every representative is only given a single one. Even I can't get you a second. The advantage of having one is very great. One of my regrets is that I wasn't patient enough for my true talent to awaken and couldn't get one myself. Lionel shook her head. She deserves at least this much for an apology. Revenge for her mother is very important to her and her luck is less than that of mine. I have you and Dad, but she... Well, anyway, a gold token is enough for me. Eleanor smiled, a hint of sadness in her eyes. This wasn't because Lionel had turned down her goodwill, but because she could hear the affection in her son's voice. And it most definitely wasn't aimed toward her. However, Eleanor also understood from her own experience with relationships that no outside party could ever force anything to happen. She would have to wait for Lionel to figure it out himself, and she hoped that it wouldn't be too late for him by then. I guess, that little girl isn't so bad. Maybe I can help her out a little bit. On another side of planet Montex, Aina sat in silence, her tears having dried. She looked off into the distance blankly, not even budging when she noticed Savon's presence behind her. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ng experience. Chapter 12:01. Savon sat to Aina's side, silently slipping her hand into her friend's. She didn't say anything for a long time, just keeping Aina company. The small home they had rented had quite beautiful scenery around it. The air was fresh and the view from the mountain was gorgeous. Whether it was cloud, bird or sunset watching, it was perfect for them all. The two women sat on a terrace taking in these sights. Savon had already made Emil promise to keep Yuri away. Maybe it was because it was the first time Savon had shown the smallest hint of a temper, but Emil only looked at her deeply before agreeing. As far as Savon was concerned, Yuri was the worst possible influence for Aina right now. In truth, Savon wasn't sure if she'd be a good influence either, because she was very, very angry with Lionel as well. But, she still felt that it was better than whatever Yuri would have done. Just the same way Emil had wanted to kill Lionel, Yuri definitely had wanted to do the same. It was just that she was a step slow and she couldn't have possibly broken through the barrier without revealing her true strength, something her adoptive father always drilled into her not to do. "Thank you, Savon," Aina said lightly. Savon blinked. "For what?" "For always being there for me. I don't know how I can repay you, but I definitely will. As much as I owed him, I owe you just the same. I'm sorry for waiting so long to tell you that." Savon's gaze misted over, her tears threatening to fall. But she quickly wiped them away with her free forearm. "You are the closest thing I have to family left," Savon said softly. "You don't need to apologize to me, you're my sister." Visit. For a better user experience, the two women tightly held onto one another. "Are you doing okay?" Savon broke the silence. Aina smiled a bittersweet smile. "I'll be fine. I hurt him and he hurt me, now we're even." Savon frowned. She didn't like hearing things put like that. A bit of the anger she had built up for Lionel almost spilled over, but she managed to control herself. In the end, she sighed. "Even if you made a mistake, that doesn't mean you have to become a punching bag." Aina's expression softened, her smile becoming small. "I was thinking about how hard it was for him all these years. There's only so much I can remember by thinking back. I don't have his memory. The stuff I spoke about only scratched the surface. I don't think I was worth all the effort he put in, but I still made him wade through hell and high water when I could have solved it all just by opening my mouth." Savon's gaze flickered, her expression changing from time to time before she finally asked the question. "You still want to be with him, right?" "I do." Savon hadn't expected Aina to answer so quickly. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ing experience, it was weird. Savon had actually come with the intentions of talking Aina down. Though she was angry with Lionel, she still felt like the two were a match made in heaven. She didn't want to see them crumble because of a single heated exchange. But, at the same time, she didn't want Aina to take this matter too casually either, which was why she had responded like she had. Aina had seen her faults and apologized for them. If Lionel wasn't able to forgive and forget, then there was no point in them moving forward at all. If one partner held on to something and refused to let go, there was simply no hope for a relationship at all. She didn't want to see Aina spend a lifetime making up for mistakes she had made as a naive teenage girl who didn't know how to approach her first love. Now, though, it seemed like this second worry was going in full force. "Then what do you want to do about it?" Savon asked. Aina's gaze turned misty. "I don't know. I don't know what to do." At that moment, a flash of light appeared before the two women. Both Savon and Aina looked up somewhat stunned, finding it hard to believe what they were seeing before them. Savon never thought she would see a woman more beautiful than Aina. Of course, this was less about their raw features, and more about a mature air and confidence that Aina just hadn't quite yet grasped. But it was a shocking realization nonetheless. As for Aina, she found herself suddenly feeling overwhelmingly self-conscious. She didn't know where to put her hands and her gaze flickered several times as though she couldn't decide whether she should be looking down or meeting the gaze of the woman before her. Eleanor smiled, her visage seeming no different from an angel's to the two young girls. They suddenly felt as though they were looking upon an idol they could look up to for a lifetime. Eleanor crossed her legs, sitting on the ground across from the two women. But, if you looked closely, she was actually hovering a half-inch above it. Visit. For a better user experience, my son gets his airhead side from his father. Eleanor said with a light laugh. He wanted to apologize, but it seems he doesn't realize that he should do these kind of things in person. I'm sorry to say that my son also wanted to make it clear that this is just an apology, but Eleanor's words took Aina through a roller coaster of emotions. From figuring out that this was indeed Lionel's mother, to hearing that she was here to apologize, to understanding that it was just an apology. Her mind felt like it was being punched from all sides. Here. An amethyst token appeared in Eleanor's palm. She grabbed Aina's hand and slipped it in, pressing down the latter's fingers over the token. Aina subconsciously squeezed it tight. By the time she realized what had happened, Eleanor had already helped her deal with loose strands of her hair and even straightened out her clothing before vanishing into thin air, leaving her in a daze. In the skies above, Eleanor watched on with a complicated expression. She remembered that just a day ago, she had really hated this little girl. But Aina's words today and her willingness to bare her heart for all to see had changed Eleanor's thoughts of her entirely. As many would say, winning over a mother-in-law was about as good as winning over a son. I've given you a key. You just have to figure out how to open the lock. She thought to herself. On planet Luxnix, a scene one would have never expected to see was taking place. If the Luxnix were aware of what was happening, it was hard to guess how many mouthfuls of blood they would cough up. While many of the Luxnix family's upper echelon was away at the second day of the selection, a boy stricken from their family records was standing in a vault that held their greatest treasures. Visit. For a better user experience, Lionel couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. He couldn't decide whether his mother was a saint or a common thug. Chapter 1202. Lionel had never seen such a vast store of wealth in his life. However, he didn't begin rushing about, snatching everything he could catch a glimpse of. He had been serious when he spoke to Elodie. As far as he was concerned, the Luxnix family was one of his starting assets. While it might seem great for him to plunder them now, the reality was that this would only harm him in the long run. Though no one had told him, he was certain that the other heirs were far ahead of himself. And, even if the Luxnix family was willing to fully back him, that wouldn't go a very long way in changing his current state either. While it was true that the Luxnix had been hiding their true abilities and that they were actually beyond the Montex and Viola, by how much was that the case? At best, Lionel could figure that they were at or a step below the weakest seventh-dimensional families. Though that was a whole lot better than being just at the pinnacle of the sixth, it still wasn't nearly enough. One only need to look at the gap in Void Palace entries to see that Lionel was correct. The Luxnix only had a single entry above the nominal disciple ranks in their history. Granted, this was because they made the generation of Lionel's grandmother lay low, but even if they were taken into consideration, they would have at most had two more such entries, one for Roja and the other for Snow Star Order. However, if the conversation between Orinik and Ganner was anything to go by, even the decent talents of the Morales could get a slot so long as the right person gave the okay. The gap was simply far too enormous. After reaching a state of calm with this train of thought in mind, Lionel began to look around once more. Visit. For a better user experience, I only need a set of two things. I'm not sure if what I need for my second divine armor would be here, but if it is, that's excellent. As for the second matter, I will have 10 extra essences worth of fifth-dimensional evolution or after I finish. But, I've yet to decide what to spend it on. During the last few days, the progress Lionel had made was enormous. He had already decided on the design and makeup of his second divine armor and he had truly gone all out. The truth was that thanks to evolution Lionel could continue to use his current divine armor all the way up until the quasi-sixth dimension without it holding him back too much. While using it for so long would multiply his power like it did in the past, it at least wouldn't be a hindrance. But, due to the wealth his mother had left for him, Lionel realized that he didn't have to hope and pray to stumble upon the right ores any longer. He could just outright buy them. That said, why buy them if they were already here? He was just hoping that the Luxnix would have what he needed. Lionel was very much looking forward to the synergistic effects of two divine armors. It had to be remembered that Lionel's divine armors became a part of him. He couldn't just casually discard them. That was why building up an affinity through their use was possible. Visit. For a better user experience, his spatial affinity had managed to keep up with him through the fifth dimension because he used evolution ores, but it had already greatly weakened on a sixth-dimensional world. He wanted to see how it would evolve further with the stack of two armors. Still, the result of that was fairly predictable. The idea of what to use his other evolution ores on, though. That was a different matter entirely. Should I use it on a transportation treasure? The Void Palace is probably in a 7th dimension environment, right? If I don't have 6th-dimensional transportation to use at the very last, moving might be difficult. I probably can't bring out or use the segmented cube so casually anymore over there. I could make something for Little Black Star instead. The little guy is my strongest partner and he was probably right to ask for me to make something for him. I've never forged for a beast before, but it shouldn't be too much different even if the shape composition is a bit odd, or maybe something for Vice and Candle. Lionel had stuck true to his word and allowed Vice and Candle to live their lives. Unsurprisingly, they had even more trouble ingratiating themselves than Elther and they ultimately still ended up spending most of their time in the segmented cube. Visit. For a better user experience, Candle had a great amount of social anxiety and Vice was still mirroring everything Candle did, taking her as a template to hide his real thoughts. Toward this, Lionel could only be helpless. He wasn't a psychologist, so he had no idea how to take steps forward. The Void Palace definitely has savants of its own, or maybe there's even a whole department of them. It would be greatly helpful to Candle and Vice to take part like that. But I also have a feeling that the Void Palace keeps a very tight leash on such powerful existences. Is it right to trust them? Lionel was conflicted. On one hand, he didn't trust the Void Palace at all. If there was anything the dimensional verse had taught him, it was that strength talked. If the Void Palace wanted to use savants, they had to make sure they didn't grow too powerful, a lot like Lionel had tried to do. On the other hand, though, Lionel knew that he was ill-equipped to even try. Maybe that's just a chance I'll have to take if I want them to live a normal life. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ng experience, Lionel's thoughts and footsteps suddenly came to a grinding halt. After a moment, his gaze brightened and a grin spread across his lips. They really do have it here. Excellent. It seems the core of my 2nd divine armor is decided. One more coming today. DKM, love. Chapter 1203. The ore. Lionel laid his eyes on an ore that seemed to flicker between a crystalline blue and a deep abyssal black depending on what angle you looked at it from. The container around it was made out of a very special 6th-dimensional glass material, and yet even it still fogged and allowed crystalline sheets of ice to form on it from time to time. While this might not seem like a big deal on the surface, it very quickly became one when one realized that this ore was only of the 5th dimension. This ore was known as dark ice. The description of this ore was quite eerie. It was known for its ability to freeze over even space itself, causing reality to solidify before cracking it apart like glass. Lionel had been reminded of this ore while watching Carolus fight. Carolus' space affinity ability was destructive, but it was a kind of beautiful demolition to watch in real time. When Lionel watched spiderwebs of space spread through Carolus' attacks, even while he did something like walking through the air, her felt his dreamscape tremble. When he connected that feeling to his memory of this ore, something seemed to click into place. Lionel had already decided the path of his divine armors, and that was spatial affinity. The space element was far too versatile and useful to him. It was already too late to just pivot to another approach, just like how he couldn't just change the formula of his metal Bodis needs either. His path was set in stone. As such, Lionel could only build up from his current starting position. The problem was, he kind of regretted it. The spatial element had been greatly useful to Lionel. It was because of it that he was able to defeat the puppet master, someone far beyond him at the time, successfully. Since then, he had relied on it heavily, especially when he had to fight those stronger than himself. The latest _AP_SODIs are on the website. It was only recently, when Lionel began to battle 6th-dimensional existences and entered a 6th-dimensional world, that the spatial domain of his divine armor became useless. But observing Aina made Lionel realize that he was stretching himself too thin. He had too many strengths, he couldn't possibly maximize them all, at least not within a short time frame. He felt like what he should do is focus on his greatest strength, his innate node, and build everything around it. If Lionel could use his innate node freely and without consequences, he was certain that there might only be a handful of people capable of matching him at his dimension level, and all of these people would either have to have outstanding abilities or control over an innate node on the same level as himself. Lionel had already maximized his metal Bodis foundation to accelerate himself toward being able to use Scarlet Star Force freely. He used Star Core to build a sturdy base, and then he picked ores that maximized his ability to withstand forces of the light and fire elements. Lionel felt that he should have done the exact same with his divine armor, but he had been too naive to think that he could have a little of everything, and it was causing his overall battle prowess to suffer. The bad news was that there was already no going back. Lionel couldn't just undo what he had done without causing great harm to himself. However, what he could do was pivot and begin to slowly build a counter to his problems. The solution Lionel landed upon was dark ice. Rather than damaging his foundation to restart, Lionel instead chose to build upon it and synergize with it in a way that would be conducive to his goal. As such, he turned toward an ore that could both build upon his spatial affinity, but simultaneously deviate towards something that could help manage his innate node. Visit. For a better user experience, Lionel chose to approach his problem from two sides. On one hand, his metal body would lay a strong foundation, growing steadier toward a day where it could withstand his scarlet innate node. On the other hand, his divine armor would begin to build a strong affinity toward the ice and water elements, not to mention the opposing darkness elements, to balance out the damage inevitably left behind. Lionel's ultimate goal was to build his final divine armor with the core of an element that stood on the same level as his Scarlet Star Force. Void Star Force. Top 10 in Star Forces. Top 3 in Darkness Forces. Top 1 in Water Forces. It would become the perfect counter to Lionel's Scarlet Star Force, and a divine armor constructed by it would complete the cycle Lionel had planned for him and maximize his strength to an extreme in the future. Of course, there were too many things Lionel had no idea how he would do. For example, was it even possible to make a force the core of his divine armor instead of an ore? Would he have to create a forging technique capable of infusing a force into a metal and changing its properties? Truthfully, he could already posit a few potential theories on how he would do this. But that still left the largest elephant in the room unquestioned. The latest _AP_SODIs are on the website. How the hell would he find Void Star Force to begin with? It didn't need to be explained just how rare forces on the level of Void and Scarlet Star Force were. Lionel could spend a lifetime looking and still never find it. Still, Lionel chose to push this away into the future. If anything, this was the least ambitious of his goals. If he could unite the dimensional verse, why would he fear finding the source of a single force? Lionel reached out his hand and grasped the Oregon. He didn't mind anything about the future as he stepped into his segmented cube. All he could see was his Force Crafter's bench, his mind enraptured by the designs swirling about his dream world. This would be his greatest craft to this day. His fingers crackled and popped, his gaze turning a frightening cold. And then, he began. He had no idea that a certain bronze tablet in the Luxnix family's territory was glowing a shade brighter than it normally did. The latest _AP_SODIs are on the website. Chapter 1204. Lionel's fingers glided through the air in a rhythmic motion. As the connection between himself and little Tolly increased, he was able to exert more and more control without the use of these techniques. However, no matter how strong their connection became, there would never be a method more precise, accurate and fast than this. Lionel's fingers didn't have the ability to break through the sound barrier of the sixth dimension, but this made his control even finer and more controlled. Without having to compensate for the changes caused by vast booms of pressure, Lionel found his skill to have reached another level entirely. Little Tolly split into dozens of parts, each of which seemed to take turns of their own in listening to Lionel's commands. Ores of all shapes and sizes glided through the air, completely unobstructed by one another. Lionel's crafter's workbench vibrated to the rhythm of his movements. Above each semi-spherical well, a new environment was formed. In one section, one might find temperatures as high as the surface of a star of the third dimension. In another, it might be barely enough to boil third-dimensional waters. The rhythmic tapping of Lionel's foot seemed to control hidden force arts within his workbench, his mind tweaking and managing everything to the most perfect degree. Lionel had done a lot of training with this workbench to make it through his dad's program. But this was the very first time he had felt the need to use it. It could only be said that he was truly going all out. Hours ago, just after Lionel vanished in a rage, the arena fell into an odd sort of silence. Maybe the first to speak amongst it all was actually Ganner. But, due to certain matters, the only ones to actually hear him were the envoys of the Void Palace along with Orinik. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ng experience, holy shit. Did you just see what I just saw? Ganner was absolutely speechless. Orinik slowly nodded, about to open his mouth when Ganner's next words cut him off. He actually turned down such a beauty, what the fuck? Damien, use that ability of yours and find out where she went. She's vulnerable, this is the perfect time to pounce. I can't miss this opportunity. This time, Orinik couldn't stand it anymore, directly kicking Ganner's throne. He seemed to use enough strength to shatter it completely, but under some odd sort of martial art, the throne instead vibrated wildly, sending tingling sensations up the elbow Ganner had been leaning on. Orinik. Fuck. Ganner grabbed onto his elbow, his teeth chattering. Even for a higher dimensional being, the funny bone was still the funny bone. Can you be serious for once? Didn't you see his transformation? Ganner paused after hearing this, falling into silence. Then, after a moment, his eyes widened, his pupils constricting. The latest _AP_SODIs are on the website. He was in the 6th dimension. Compared to the memories of lower dimensional beings, his was on another level, at least for things that occurred acutely. Thinking back to what he had seen, he realized that it did, indeed, warrant his shock. The first 3 doors lay the foundation. They allow one to gain the most basic abilities of the metal synergy lineage factor. The 4th door forms the crown upon the forehead, but it's at most superficial and can't be said to solidify until the 5th door. This boosts one's Earth variant affinity to great heights, and it's the minimum requirement for practicing some of the more core techniques of their family. The 6th door is where things truly begin to change because the bronze runes appear. They cover the skin in lines that travel either straight up and down, or straight left and right. In a generation of the Morales, only 1,000 would manage to open their 6th door in their first try. Upon opening the 7th door, the bronze runes will etch onto the muscles and the inner organs. Only if one opens up to at least the 5th door would one have a chance of opening the 7th door on their subsequent attempts. Upon opening the 8th door, the bronze runes will etch right into the bones. It's an excruciating process and among the reasons why so few manage to open the 9th door on their first attempt. However, even to make it this far, one needs to have opened at least the 6th door on their first attempt, and then there's the 9th door. Upon opening this door, visit. For a better user experience, the halo and the most coveted innate ability of the metal synergy lineage factor, gravity domain. Ganner said slowly. In order to have a chance at opening the 9th, one would have to open to at least the 7th door on their first attempt. But, even those odds are slim. Only those who open to at least the 8th on their first attempt might have a decent percentage chance. Orinik and Ganner let it sink in. They had come to a 6th dimensional sector, only looking for a chance to escape the harsh environment of the Void Palace. That place couldn't be considered a school for cheating the younger generation. It was more like a hellscape where only those who could survive would get respect and those who couldn't would be treated like trash by the side of the road. To make matters worse, after entering the Void Palace, it was impossible to leave casually without certain privileges. And yet, to think that they would actually stumble upon such an opportunity instead. If Lionel was a random bastard of the Morales family who just so happened to open the 9th door not just once to enter the 4th dimension, but twice to enter the 5th, his price would already be astronomical. However, they had all seen the violet aura that wafted out from Lionel's halo. It made what should have been his gravity domain somewhat different from what it should be in practice. And, if Orinik recalled properly, there was even an odd hint of red in there that carried a violent sort of suppressive aura. Lionel was not only a talent, but his lineage factor had mutated. The latest _AP_SODIES are on the website. Chapter 1205. Eventually, Orinik was forced out of his world of dreams and aspirations to realize that he should probably do something about the mess left behind. He didn't feel very bad about not being able to stop Miel from taking action against Lionel. If anything, he was just a bit worried that he would lose control over the atmosphere. After all, this was the second time someone had interfered with, seemingly, no consequences whatsoever. But, it was already too late to worry about that, he could only press forward. Soon, the billboard was back up and the rounds proceeded as though nothing at all had happened. A masked man stepped onto the arena after Lionel and Aina left to fight his battle, going all out and eventually defeating his opponent before returning to his seating arrangements. He, like many others, were entirely focused on themselves and claiming a spot for the third day of the selections. Shockingly enough, though, neither Lionel nor Aina returned. In fact, there were many others that simply didn't show up to their battles, causing forfeits by default. Toward this matter, Orinik wasn't very caring. Surviving a strike from a six-dimensional existence while only being Tier 3 was more than enough to give Lionel a nominal disciple spot and he could justify it with ease. So, he wasn't worried about missing out on Lionel in the slightest. Lionel didn't care about what was happening in the arena. Truthfully, the only reason he would go now would be to support his friends and defeat Miguel. The latest _AP_SODIES are on the website. When it came to the latter, Lionel felt like their clash would happen without a shadow of a doubt very soon. Selection or not, it simply didn't matter. After all, wasn't Lionel quite literally in the Luxnix estate currently? He had no need to go and meet Miguel, soon enough the latter would come to him. As for his friends, well, Lionel was a bit ashamed to meet them currently. It was the first time he had felt such a feeling in his life. The matter with Aina didn't matter so much, or more accurately, the fact that it was her wasn't important, nor was their history. Lionel felt like he had let himself down with the way he reacted, and that was the foundation of it all. When had he ever lost his temper like that? When had he, even when simmering with rage, not reacted calculatively? Even when his best friend of over a decade was betraying his trust and almost costing him his life, wasn't he still calm and cool-headed? He had stepped completely outside of his character and he was disgusted with himself. What kind of leader could he be if he didn't have perfect control of his emotions? There was simply no excuse. As a king, he couldn't afford to be human and to have flaws. He had to be perfect not for the sake of himself, but for the sake of those who trusted him. SHU. 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 The whistling, sharp winds of Lionel's fingers became more defined and controlled, his mind becoming calmer and more focused and refined as he dialed in on his purpose. The latest _AP_SODIES are on the website. He had given Aina an apology, but he felt like he owed his brothers an apology as well. Who they followed was a reflection of themselves. If their king was such trash, what did that say about them? He refused to make this mistake again. No, he would never make this mistake again. That was something he swore to himself and on his heart. It was simply a shame that Lionel hadn't seemed to learn just yet that there was no amount of level-headedness that could eliminate something who held to your core. Bang! TSSSSSS. Lionel opened his eyes slowly, a spark of a radiant blue reflecting deep within them. Something, at the right angle, his pale violet eyes would seem more silver than violet. Now, they seemed to have gained a tinge of a blue character to them, something flickering. The temperature of Lionel's body cooled considerably and the color of the world seemed to change. No, it wasn't that the color of the world had changed, it was almost like it had instead gained a small filter to it, allowing Lionel to see things he hadn't quite been able to see before. So, this is what a water force affinity feels like. It's so different. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ng experience, the Morales family's lineage factor could only be said to be fantastical. To give one the ability to gain affinity simply by assimilating ores and special metals, it was no wonder they stood atop the seventh dimension of the human domain. Lionel hadn't felt like this when his spatial affinity gained a wild boost to it, but that was likely because space elemental force didn't really clash with anything he had known. On top of that, he was quite green to the dimensional verse when he made the change, so it wasn't really upturning any of his world views. But, after seeing and truly feeling water force for the first time, Lionel couldn't help but gasp in astonishment. It was completely antithetical to his exceptionally high fire elemental affinity, and it was as though he was looking through the world in a completely new lens. The kind of inspiration it gave him leagues beyond anything he had ever experienced before. The feeling was so much more intimate than when Lionel used his spear domain lineage factor to feel the affinities of different spears. He had tested out all sorts of spears, he had even touched water domain spear before, but this was completely different. The difference was akin to a person telling you their life experiences and the hardships they had been through, versus you experiencing that life in their stead. It couldn't even be compared. Lionel reached out a hand. A globule of water force quickly formed, and soon a smooth sphere of blue waters appeared before him. It was so precisely controlled that it almost looked like a glass orb instead. His fingers snapped and the sphere of water suddenly froze over. Space crackled as lines of fine ice appeared in seemingly empty air. Just as Lionel was about to continue his tests, a frostiness coating the tips of his pale violet hair, his gaze narrowed. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ing experience, he had been so focused on his craft that he hadn't really been paying attention to anything else. He completely trusted that his mother would never let anything happen to him. But now that he had suddenly freed so many minds, he finally noticed it. The silver tablet is trembling. Chapter 1206. Lionel took a step and vanished from the lab setting, appearing within the treasure vault of the Luxnix with the segmented cube hovering above his palm. With the structure of the Luxnix estate, much of its important structures were hidden underground. This was only to be expected from a family that had been forced to lay low for 3 generations. After all, they couldn't remain stagnant while they waited, so much of their moves either came in the form of top-secret espionage-like missions, or were conducted in hidden spaces like this one. The treasure vault of the Luxnix was no different. It was like an enormous steel sphere buried deep within the ground. The curving silver walls made Lionel feel especially small, as even with the ample lighting in the surroundings, he could still just barely make out its very highest point. All around, the very same orbs of golden light that floated about the Luxnix estate on the surface floated here as well, outlining what felt like an infinite number of shelves. Up above, many hollow cylindrical structures hung. At first glance, it looked like they hovered upon nothing, but Lionel was just barely able to make out that they were actually being held up by extraordinarily thin lines of force. These hollow cylinders had no base or top, like a piece of rolled-up paper. However, their insides were lines with more shelves that carried even more treasures. From his position on the ground, Lionel could easily look up and see into these cylindrical stores. With a glance, he could tell that the most valuable materials of the Luxnix were placed up there and out of reach, and though they seemed like a single leap away, Lionel was certain that the protections were not simple. When Lionel stepped out, his first instinct was that whatever was causing his silver tablet to react like this had to be in one of those structures up above. Originally, Lionel had completely ignored what was above for 2 reasons. Firstly, those were almost definitely 6-dimensional treasures. In fact, with the Luxnix family's level and history, Lionel wouldn't be surprised if they had managed to get their hands on a few 7th-dimensional treasures here and there. Ultimately, though, Lionel both didn't need such high-level treasures to forge his divine armor, and even if he did, little Tolly and he weren't quite ready yet to forge something so intricate with ores at that level. The latest _AP_SODIs are on the website. The second reason was so that he wouldn't be tempted to take anything. He was already making the mature decision not to take anything he didn't need, but there was no need to tempt himself any further. But now... Lionel shook his head. It's not up there. That means it's somewhere else? Lionel took out the silver tablet. After connecting the dots and finding out about the 3-finger cult, he had been far more cautious with how he used and exposed it. So, although it had a certain usefulness in battle, he didn't use it. The silver tablet looked just the same as he remembered it. A solid rectangular block, perfectly polished, and there was still writing in a language on it Lionel couldn't even begin to understand, and even the dictionary was stumped by. What was truly odd was that Lionel had a feeling that this was less an language and more like a code, as though the silver tablet was being encrypted. As for why he felt that way, well, it was for the same reason he could grasp the silver tablet's abilities without trying to do so. The tablet seemed to have formed some connection with him that gave him a vague inkling about its abilities. Outside of that, Lionel had also gotten a vague inkling about what its purpose was as well. But, rather than getting a tangible explanation, what he instead understood was that the day he could decipher the words on the tablet would be the day he understood what its purpose was. When Lionel took the tablet out, its glow grew a measure and the vague tugging became tangible. Visit. For a better user experience that way, huh? Alright. Lionel flickered and disappeared, not wasting time. As for the matter of who remained in the Luxnix estate, he didn't really care. His mother would probably be back soon and most were occupied with the selection. As for those that remained, how could they ever expect someone like Lionel to be roaming about their most secretive regions? Lionel didn't step out of the underground location. Instead, he followed a host of wandering tunnels. The craftsmanship of the Luxnix was actually quite good. Lionel walked through numerous tunnels and he even came across a few straggling members of the Luxnix who hadn't gone to the selection. However, maybe it was because of Lionel's confidence and uncaring attitude, but none of the people he came across did more than give him a glance. In their eyes, since Lionel could be here, he was meant to be here. In addition, this was the location for the Luxnix hidden forces, so by necessity, most here were unknown existences to the outside world. Plus, they could all sense dense Luxnix blood from Lionel. It was easy to tell that he was one of their own. Halt. Exchange the proper merits here before continuing forward. Lionel's good luck didn't last for very long, though. When he felt that he had come close, and could even feel what the silver tablet wanted him to feel on the other side, he found himself in a heavily guarded region. The latest _AP_SODIs are on the website. The location was a temple in an underground city. Beyond it, Lionel could sense a staircase that led up, probably to the surface. It was likely one of the many entrances to that location, and it was clearly not something just anyone, anywhere could see whenever they wanted. However, as quick as this change occurred, Lionel's mind was even quicker. With a flip of his palm, the snowy star pendant his grandfather had given him appeared in his hand. The reaction of the guards was almost immediate. Without hesitation, they all bowed. Lionel didn't say a word as he strode forth, his mind completely focused. He climbed up the longest set of stairs he had ever had the pleasure of climbing in his life, a keen anticipation in his heart. A blinding golden light was waiting for him on the other side. It took just a moment for Lionel's gaze to adjust and for the room of what could only be described as worship opened up before him. However, Lionel could only find himself focusing on just one thing. A bronze tablet, eerily similar to his own. But, this one had words that rearranged in his mind and projected a tangible meaning to him. He could read the very same prophecy that the Luxnix had and feeling the same thing Miguel had. In fact, he could even feel his blood stirring, as though something deep within was trying to stir itself awake and shine through. For a moment, Lionel even felt that the third awakening of his wisdom branch was a single step away. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ng experience, he couldn't help but stand in mute shock. At least he did until. I've been waiting. For so long. Chapter 1207. Lionel's gaze sharpened, but he couldn't find who had spoken. The temple the bronze tablet was housed in was completely empty, but Lionel wasn't very surprised by this. It was likely that it took an enormous amount of merits to step foot in here to begin with, so it was rare for anyone outside of the Star Order elders to come here, and likely maybe Miguel since they care for him so much. However, judging by the shift in Lionel's lineage factor just now, the reason one would exchange so much to meditate upon the bronze tablet was for the sake of helping their awakenings along. For people on the level of the Star Order elders, the likelihood of receiving more breakthroughs was minimal at best. The result of this was a treasure that was rarely put to use for anyone outside of the pride of the Luxnix family, Miguel himself. This was all to say that Lionel was alone. Or, rather, he should have been. So, where was this voice coming from? You can stop looking around, young one. You likely wouldn't be able to see me unless you had a special pair of eyes. Lionel took this advice almost instantly and activated the second awakening of his wisdom branch, taking the snowy star owl's eyes for himself. But, even then, he couldn't see a single thing. The voice chuckled. Unfortunately, our snowy star owl's gaze can't be considered special enough. We are quite insignificant in the grander scheme. Hearing this, Lionel gave up and calmed himself. If he had been exposed by an elder of the Luxnix, he would just accept it. Regardless, now that he knew this tablet was here, he would definitely get his hands on it eventually. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ng experience, this was only the second tablet he had confirmation of. As of now, the third tablet, which he speculated was in the possession of Aina's father, was just that, speculation. He had no way of knowing if his deduction was reality just yet. There's no need to be so on guard, my descendant. Didn't I say that I've been waiting for you? The voice chuckled once more. Waiting for me? Why is that? Lionel finally spoke, realizing that there was probably no harm in entertaining this, spirit. For a bit. Because you're the light that will bring us to glory. Lionel's gaze narrowed. Who are you, exactly? Me? The voice chuckled. Just a fallen elder. Lionel's dreamscape released several sparks, his gaze lighting up. Your wise star order? The most recent wise star order from 3 generations ago? The latest _AP_SODIs are on the website. The voice fell into silence, clearly not having expected Lionel to make such an accurate guess so swiftly. But, very soon, he came to an understanding. I see, so your ability is so helpful in this regard. This is a very good thing. Your natural talent already comes with so many strengths of its own. Your ability being more cognitive will give you good balance. Lionel's brows shot up. It was rare for people to see through what his ability was. In fact, most assumed that one of his lineage factors was his true ability. But, that was a good thing for him. After all, one should keep their ability hidden for as long as they could do so. However, this man had to have earned the title of Wise Star Order for a reason, right? As for how this man had protected his consciousness for so long, Lionel assumed it had to do with the tablet. After all, didn't his current silver tablet have thousands of lives waiting for him to resurrect? Unfortunately, Lionel was wrong this time. But, it would likely take more information for him to understand this. Lionel took a deep breath. My relationship with the Luxnix is quite complex right now. I don't know how easy it will be to lead them to glory, as you say. I'm more glad to hear that you aren't adverse to it. Wise Star Order almost smiled through his words. I was partially ready for you to demand our destruction. Lionel shook his head, confirming that Wise Star Order was indeed aware of what had happened to him. Visit. For a better user experience, not everyone is at fault for this. I'm relieved. I am truly relieved. Wise Star Order's voice carried a doting air to it. The more he observed Lionel, the more satisfied he seemed to become. Without even meditating upon the tablet, Lionel had actually already completed so many awakenings. How could he not feel gratified? Ancestor Wise Star Order, I'm very curious about this tablet, though. This is my very first time seeing it. Can you tell me about it? Of course, of course. This was always my intention. This bronze tablet was found in a zone by our ancestor and can be considered to be the root of our family's origins because it was from it that our lineage factor was birthed. Lionel's brows rose. Did that mean his silver tablet also had a lineage factor hidden within it? But something about that deduction felt off. Lionel was uncomfortable because he had so little information. Him drawing conclusions now felt like throwing darts blindfolded. Everything we take pride in as a Luxnix originated from this starting point. But, it is exactly just that. A starting point. I'm ashamed to say that in our millennia of progression, none of those who share our blood has ever been able to dig up the truth behind it all. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ng experience, after my death, I made use of my ability to tether my soul to the bronze tablet so that I could continue to analyze and understand it. Before my time came, I had come to grasp a timeline for the words written upon the tablet and understood that these matters would take place 3 generations later. It was only after my time, though, that I grasped some deep-rooted truths. Of these truths, I can only say that I've understood a small inkling. Have you ever wondered why the representation of our lineage factor is a 12-sided star and not a feather or an owl? What value does the northern star have for us? Chapter 1208. Lionel's gaze narrowed, his ears subconsciously perking up. He would be lying if he said that he wasn't interested in hearing the truth behind this matter. He too had considered it an oddity. In his own low-level understanding, he found it weird that something like snow force came from a northern star. Snow force was indeed a star force, but shouldn't the type of star in question be called snow star? Lionel himself accepted that this was a crude line of reasoning that even a 5-year-old could think of. It was ironically because of this that he didn't pursue it too far. Who was he to say what the star should or shouldn't be called? For all he knew, all these names were chosen randomly. Snow force didn't even sound like it made any sense for a star elemental force already, so why did anything else need to make sense? Just as Lionel was quite eager to hear the explanation, the laugh of wise star order entered his ears again. Truthfully, I don't really know either. Lionel was speechless. Was this old man pulling a prank on him? He wasn't even sure how to react to that. Seeing Lionel's reaction, wise star order only laughed harder. In fact, he laughed so hard that Lionel was a bit worried about his health. And then, he felt somewhat bad. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ng experience, this old man had probably been stuck here in silence for who knows how long. This was the first human interaction he had had in a very long time. It was no wonder he was acting like this. Lionel's view of the world was still very much Earth-centric. Though lifespans had about doubled to tripled thanks to Earth's technology, the idea of being secluded for decades at a time was still foreign to Lionel. Even he could only stand to focus on a single problem for a few days at most. He had no idea how wise Star Order had done it. I'm just pulling your leg a bit, young one. I don't have the full story, but I do know a bit. The fundamental truth is that the snowy star owl lineage factor is just a starting point. Beyond the 12 awakenings, there's something more. 12 awakenings? Lionel's brow arched upward. Yes. Wise Star Order confirmed. There are 3 branches of the snowy star order lineage factor. Each branch has a total of 4 awakenings. Once you complete these 4 awakenings for all 3 branches, your snowy star owl lineage factor can be said to be complete. And then? Lionel pressed. And then you will have a choice before you. You can either continue forward with a perfectly blossomed lineage factor. Or, you can regress. Visit. For a better user experience, Lionel's pupils flickered. Regress? Yes. Regress. Beyond the snowy star owl there isn't an evolution. Rather, there is an opportunity for an exchange. You can give up everything the snowy star owl has given you and trade it in for a higher class bloodline. But, you will need to start from the very bottom once again. Lionel's brow furrowed. The idea of starting from the very bottom in exchange for a higher class lineage factor didn't sound terrible to him. He had awakened his snowy star owl lineage factor for the first time 3 or 4 years ago, and yet he had already progressed so far without the help of the bronze tablet. Of course, Lionel had an idea as to why this was. His snowy star owl lineage factor was heavily reliant on snow force affinity and everything was centered around it. However, because of his innate node, Lionel's base light elemental affinity was already far beyond anything his density of bloodline could compare to. As a result, by virtue of his innate node alone, he was guaranteed to have high-class Lux Nix blood. Beyond this, Lionel felt that whatever he was exchanging his bloodline for was highly likely to be related to the snowy star owl to begin with, so it was probable that his innate node would continue to give him a great advantage. The issue here, though, were the variables. What if this new bloodline wasn't as compatible with him as the snowy star owl? What if he was wrong about their relation and this new bloodline didn't respond well to his innate node at all? He could think of too many things that could potentially go wrong. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ng experience, that's an interesting expression you have there. That other youth didn't hesitate to purge his Lux Nix blood, and he hasn't even told anyone of the change. He's only interested in climbing to a higher peak. What's left behind doesn't matter much. Lionel's brows furrowed further. I can't say that I'm much different than he is. The issue is I just don't know if it's worth it. And judging by what you're saying, there'll probably be more than just this one chance to purge the gained lineage factor and take on a new one, right? So then you have to consider the variable that even if this coming lineage factor isn't useful, there may very well be one in the future that is. Plus, there's the problem of techniques. I used to believe the snowy star owl lineage factor was weak and not very useful until my mother gave me your techniques. If I have to start from scratch to build techniques that are suitable instead of relying on several generations worth of trial and error, it might not even be worth having a stronger lineage factor if the end result is weaker overall to begin with. Lionel had learned this lesson the hard way. In fact, when he thought about it, even his metal synergy lineage factor only seemed far more powerful only because metal body and divine armor were such excellent synergistic techniques. Though he was confident in creating his own techniques if given enough time, how much time would that be? And how many times would he have to undergo the same thing? And, the greatest problem of all, while his strength was undergoing these peaks and valleys, how would the people who needed his support do in the meantime? Your concerns are valid, but ultimately the decision is up to you. What I can tell you is that considering how far these prophecies say you must travel, a lineage factor of the sixth dimension will quickly become useless to you. Still, those are matters for the future. In the present, I can describe to you the lineage factors that come next. Well, at least the two that I know of. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ng experience. Chapter 1209. The first lineage factor after the snowy star owl is the white stone elephant, at least I believe this is the translation. It is possible that it could be the white-scaled elephant. Either way, it's a powerful and robust beast. I'm sure you remember the vision you saw when your snowy star owl lineage factor first awakened. The sight of a majestic bird flying through the starry skies, crossing galaxies with a single flap of its wings and leaving roads of gold in its wake. The white stone elephant is no less majestic. It doesn't have the snowy star owl's speed, but for what it lacks in it, it's capable of making up in spades with its looming presence. Its body is covered from head to toe in a tough, white, leathery skin that almost appear to be scales at some angles. A singular gem takes the centerpiece of its forehead as home. Its ankles are surrounded by halos of gold and its tusks shimmer like gems. Wise Star Order seemed to have a way with words, or maybe Lionel's imagination was just too vivid compared to the others thanks to his dream world. But, regardless of what the truth was, Lionel could almost see the majestic beasts before him, the rings of gold following its slow and methodical steps. The white stone elephant has 3 branches. The strength branch. The healing branch. The wisdom branch. Once again, much like our snowy star owl lineage factor, the healing branch is considered to be a secondary benefit. But, as you can see, secondary doesn't necessarily mean weak. Lionel's thoughts sped up, quickly incorporating the information he learned. In truth, the loss of the speed branch was quite devastating to him as it was perfect for countering the weakness of his metal body. Though it didn't seem like it now, Lionel's body was actually very heavy. It only became more so thanks to the fact star core or had become one of his fundamental building blocks. The latest _AP_SODIs are on the website. With his light elemental affinity, it was still possible for Lionel to supplement this loss with techniques. But the innate speed boost his bloodline provided him couldn't be easily replaced on a whim. That said, an improved wisdom branch might be worth the trade-off. After all, while Lionel had said his greatest strength was his innate node, that was only because it was tangible and not auxiliary. When it came to his greatest strength that didn't directly translate to combat power, that was, without a doubt, his mind and ability. But this led to another problem. If he gave up his snowy star owl lineage factor, what would that mean for his mind? Would it regress as well? The answer was likely yes. But was the trade-off worth it? Lionel felt like a big problem had been laid at his lap. But there was no easy answer or fix. Plus, wasn't this a problem many people would like to have? The following lineage factor is the starry-tailed fox. Among the 3 lineage factors we know of, the originator of this one is definitely the most beautiful. A sleek and slender fox with radiant white fur that often appeared silver depending on the angle. Its eyes were like 2 orbs of endless gold without start, finish, or depths capable of being fathomed. Its tails were both ethereal and real, both spiritual and corporeal. It's difficult to pin an exact number on them, but at maturity, they were as vast as the starry skies and just as endless. They're the kind of creatures that seem almost too beautiful to be of this world. Visit. For a better user experience, truthfully, what I know about this beast is far less than what I know about the snowy star owl and the white stone elephant. Just gazing upon it made me feel as though my head was being split in 2, so I am uncertain if I was able to see through to its true abilities, and everything is a bit foggy. I unfortunately don't dare to try again, or what remains of me may very well be forcefully dispersed. But, as far as I can tell, there is the wisdom branch which makes a reappearance, the speed branch, the healing branch, and there's a 4th branch that might be called the spirit branch or the star branch or the tail branch. I'm honestly not sure if any of this is correct. The only thing I'm certain of is that the wisdom and healing branch seem to be recurring. As for everything else, I have no way of confirming. Lionel fell into his thoughts. It seemed that this starry-tailed fox was more in line with what he needed. If for nothing else, he might have to suffer the regression of the white stone elephant just to ensure that he could gain access to the starry-tailed fox one day. In addition, from these conclusions, it seemed that these creatures all shared another similarity. They shared colors of white, silver and gold, while also placing great emphasis on their purity. The images that Wise Star Order described all fell in line with this. In that case, there was a high likelihood that they were also connected by a string of light elemental force as well. Or, at the very least, star elemental affinity. Regardless, Lionel had a leg up. After all, Scarlet Star Force was a top 10 star force in existence as well. Ancestor Wise Star Order, what elemental affinities do these creatures have? And what dimension are they considered to be in? Ah, excellent question. Seems I've gone a bit senile and forgot something so important. Visit. For a better user experience, all of these creatures seem to have a light and star elemental affinity, that is the thread that connects them. The white stone elephant uses a force known as gem force. The starry-tailed fox uses a force known as spirit or ethereal force. I'm not sure which is the name. It might be neither of those. I am certain that it is a light star elemental fusion force, though. As for their dimensions, the white stone elephant is 7th dimensional, and the starry-tailed fox is to the 7th dimension what the snowy star owl is to the 6th dimension. It is considered to be at the very pinnacle. It has almost no opponents at its level. Lionel's gaze sharpened. This alone was enough for him to take the risk. A lineage factor at the pinnacle of the 7th dimension, the very same as the Morales family, would be endlessly beneficial to him. However, what Wise Star Order said next surprised Lionel even more. It's just a feeling this old man has, but I believe that the starry-tailed fox isn't the last. It's just that this bronze tablet doesn't have anything beyond it to offer. Also, I have to warn you. For every shade of blossoming light that the starry star owl, white stone elephant and starry-tailed fox represent, I have also sensed a dark counterpart that can't be reached with this tablet either. Lionel's gaze narrowed when he heard this, his mind drifting to those words once again. A union of light and darkness will reveal the 12-pointed star. The latest _AP_SODIs are on the website. Chapter 12:10. If Miguel could feel the uniqueness of the auras on the characters, Lionel could definitely do so as well. But, as many potential meanings as Miguel could think of, Lionel could think of 100 times more. This wasn't just because Lionel's mind was faster than Miguel's, but it was also because Lionel's scope of knowledge was beyond Miguel's in this regard as well. From Miguel's perspective, he was likely completely unaware that other potential tablets existed. If you approached this from the perspective that this was the one and only tablet there was, then how would you view things? You would probably believe that any and everything written on the tablet could be accomplished by it and it alone, right? From Miguel's perspective, he could probably sense the shadow's wise star order mentioned as well. However, he probably believed that the reason he couldn't see them clearly was because he was the light. As such, if he wanted to learn more about those shadows, he would need to find darkness to meditate upon the tablet. Then, their union would result in something more powerful than the individual sum of their parts. This was probably why Miguel felt it was more likely that this union involved marriage or, at the very least, copulation. Though he could think of other possibilities, this was the one that made the most sense given the understanding he had and the scope of his knowledge. Truthfully, no one could blame him for reaching that conclusion. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ing experience, but, for Lionel, who had a silver tablet in his possession, and was even aware that there was potentially a second bronze tablet in the hands of Aina's father, his perspective was different. If you add in wise star order supplementing Lionel with his knowledge, then Lionel's view was even broader than it was originally. With this like this, the hypothesis that has the highest odds at 68% is that there are two sets of tablets. One set allows one to grasp the darkness lineage factors and the other set allows one to grasp these light lineage factors. In that case, the odds that this refers to Aina, at least for now, is nearly zero. Aina gained a darkness affinity from her abyssal panther bloodline. But, firstly, that's only a fifth-dimensional creature, not enough to be a shadow to the snowy star owl. And, secondly, I would assume that she would need to meditate upon the twin tablet to this one to gain whatever lineage factor is on the other side, something I don't believe she has done. With Aina's abilities to ingest bloodlines, though, it's not impossible that she could fit the description in the future. Unfortunately, I don't know if he'll be able to keep an eye on that anymore or not. Lionel shook his head. His hot head had gotten in the way. He really shouldn't have snapped like that. Still, even if I think I've understood the mystery of this tablet well enough, what about my silver tablet? And what about Aina's father's bronze tablet? What are these tablets? Are they all just stores of power and lineage factors? But my tablet doesn't have a lineage factor hidden with it like this one does. Visit. For a better user experience, is it that I need to find the bronze tablet counterpart to my own silver tablet so that I can start at the beginning? After all, if there needs to be an exchange from start to end like it is here, then maybe the hidden lineage factor in mine won't appear until I do. Does that mean Aina's father has a lineage factor bestowed by his own? Lionel's head spun with all sorts of thoughts, but he couldn't seem to come up with a conclusion. He only had 2 data points, and yet he was trying to extrapolate. It was a recipe for disaster. Lionel shook his head. Speculating on matters he had so little information about was nothing more than a waste of time. Instead, he preferred to ask Wise Star Order the question he had held back from asking until this moment. Ancestor Wise Star Order, when you chose to tether your soul here, what purpose did you have for it? Was it really just to pass on this knowledge to me? The question was an obvious one, at least to Lionel. He didn't get lost in the fantastical nature of the world that was opening up wider and wider to him. Rather, he was able to see the obvious flaw sitting right before him. Visit. For a better user experience earlier, Wise Star Order had implied that Miguel had already shed his lineage factor before. This meant that by now, Miguel, at the very least, had the white stone elephant bloodline at his beck and call. Logically, this meant even if he didn't understand things to the detail that Wise Star Order described, he had still figured out enough to understand how to improve and upgrade himself. The rest of this were things that Lionel could have learned himself, especially since his perspective on these matters was even wider than Wise Star Order. Wise Star Order could only speculate that there were more tablets elsewhere. But he had no idea that there were tablets completely unrelated to the one that right here. So long as Miguel gained the starry-tailed fox's lineage factor, he too would be able to conclude that there was more still waiting for him elsewhere. This was all to say. Neither Lionel nor Miguel needed these matters explained to them. At best, Wise Star Order had secluded himself here, torturing himself for what was probably hundreds of years, and for what, exactly? To make sure his juniors grasped knowledge they would have anyway a few years earlier? Maybe Lionel could be considered a genius to have grasped this so quickly, and maybe someone else would have skipped over this thought a bit too quickly, but as far as he was concerned, it didn't take a genius to see that there was something wrong with this picture. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ing experience, so he needed to know. Were the intentions of Wise Star Order more secretive and sinister than it seemed? Or was there another reason? Chapter 12:11. A hushed silence fell over the temple, Wise Star Order seeming to not want to answer immediately. There was one very important thing that had been left out in all of this, something that had been nagging at Lionel even more so than the oddity of Wise Star Order's actions. And that was the existence of the title Wise Star Order to begin with. What did Wise Star Order, Snow Star Order and Northern Star Order even mean? Since the lineage factor of the Lux Nix had originated from this tablet, then these titles should have come from it as well, correct? In that case, what did they mean? Another oddity even beyond this was the title Snow Star Order. From Wise Star Order's deductions, it seemed that the Healing Branch and the Wisdom Branch were recurring themes. In addition, this all seemed to double back to the 12-pointed star, or, in other words, the Northern Star. That begged the question, how was this related to Snow Star Order at all? It seemed odd. The only one of the three titles that seemed out of place. Of course, there was the possibility that it was a special title reserved for the Snowy Star Owl, but that just opened up more questions than answers, because in such a situation, this would mean that the oddities here were the title of Wise Star Order and Northern Star Order. But, logically, an anomaly of three things couldn't be two separate parts of the whole. Right? Lionel's mind was spinning in overdrive. Visit. For a better user experience from what he understood, the Northern Star Order title was very rare, so rare, in fact, that it had been many, many generations since it last appeared. The Wise Star Order title appeared 3 generations ago, but didn't seem to receive the same rarity attached to it. What was odd was that according to Lionel's grandmother, Wise Star Order and Snow Star Order appeared in history at about the same rate, while Northern Star Order almost never did. By now, the oddity was obvious. If Lionel was the creator of the tablet, an existence he had to assume was either alive or had at least once been, what would his purpose be? Likely, it would be to pass down their lineage. In that case, how would the titles be related to this? Well, in all likelihood, those who received these titles would be the ones the creator placed the greatest hope in. The creator wouldn't be able to pick and choose who ended up with their tablet. However, if one was intelligent enough to be capable of passing on their lineage through a tablet, wouldn't they also be capable of maximizing their effort? If Lionel put himself in such a person's shoes, what would he choose to do? Well, instead of throwing a fit and stressing over exactly who was lucky enough to find their inheritance, I would instead tag them. I would give them just enough strength to build up an empire for themselves, and allow them to procreate and germinate through several generations. By then, an investment in what once was just one or a handful of people, would suddenly become an investment into millions, billions, even tens of billions. Visit. For a better user experience then, at my leisure, would go through these individuals one by one. Over hundreds of years, thousands, tens of thousands, and even more, the number of individuals I would be able to test and groom would be almost too much to count. Eventually, I would get lucky. I would find a candidate that matched my requirements and smile upon realizing that everything had finally worked out. Then, would bestow such a person a title that would raise them above the rest. Such a person would have the greatest chance of maximizing my lineage and ensuring that what remains of me blossoms forth, growing to the potential I always knew it had. Of course, these were just Lionel's thoughts. It was a logical progression of things he felt had a better than 90% probability of being true, though he was certain that he was also missing large chunks here and there, not to mention several fine details. But, why was this all important? What weight did it carry? Well, just logically speaking, if such a person was indeed a genius and they chose to create multiple of these titles, the names given wouldn't be meaningless, right? In fact, such a person would likely place dividing tiers among these names where certain titles would be worth far more than others were. If Lionel was such a person, he would most definitely rank Snow Star Order at the very bottom. After all, its origin was the weakest of the lineage factors and it was tied to the weakest of the beasts. As for Wise Star Order and Northern Star Order, they would be far better. They encompassed a potential that touched upon all the beasts and were applicable to all of the lineage factors. Logically, then, wouldn't Wise Star Order be just as rare as Northern Star Order? At the very least, even if Wise Star Order was a step below Northern Star Order, it should still be more rare than Snow Star Order. Right? The latest _AP_SODIs are on the website. So the question was, why was it that Wise Star Order had appeared so frequently in the history of the Luxniks? Shouldn't such a powerful title be more scarce? As the creator of this lineage factor, wouldn't I feel far more selective when handing out the most precious of my titles? Of course, that was just an oddity. What if it was just a coincidence? It might be. After all, Lionel knew so little about these matters, definitely far less than his great ancestor Wise Star Order. Unless it is that there was never more than a single Wise Star Order to begin with. Maybe, since the very beginning, such a prestigious title had only appeared once and its importance was cleverly hidden over the years by the very same man. Lionel's lips curled into a smile. You can read my mind right, ancestor. So I don't really need to waste my time repeating all of this? Lionel flipped his palm, a silver disc appearing in his hand. Hey you useless hunk of metal, what's Ancestor Wise Star Order's ability index? Ping a visit. For the best no_vel_read_ing experienced replying to seed, squinting eyes face ability index, soul manipulation, tier 5, immortality. Lionel chuckled dryly. Son of a bitch. Chapter 12:12. Lionel had already memorized the known ability indexes. So, he didn't really need the dictionary to explain anything more to him. Seed. Root. Form. Manipulation. Immortality. Even if he hadn't memorized these 5 titles, just by the fact that Wise Star Order was in tier 5 to begin with was shocking enough. There was only one group of people who could enter the 5th tier. Savants. Lionel had to say that the creator of these tablets surely chose well. There probably was no better choice for a title like Wise Star Order than a savant with a soul ability. Lionel felt like this was a great opportunity. He really wanted to find out how savants who hadn't been locked up since their youth functioned. From what it seemed, Wise Star Order was kind and even somewhat pitiable. However, Lionel was well aware that those who fell on the spectrum savants normally did were actually very good at falling in line and displaying an outward facade to fool those around them. In fact, if you weren't careful, you would very quickly find yourself being manipulated. Apparently, though, Lionel didn't realize the irony in his own thoughts. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ing experience, someone else would have already fallen into Wise Star Order's rhythm. The moment Lionel felt pity for his ancestor, it was pretty much over. Wise Star Order most definitely hadn't wasted his years of immortality. If Lionel also blindly trusted him, what chance did he stand? Lionel shook his head. I wouldn't be surprised if the instances of Northern Star Order appearing in history were fabricated as well. You really thought ahead, just in case a Northern Star Order really did appear one day, you would have a backlog of fake history to rely upon so no one shone light on you. But the question still remains, why? With a savant leading the charge, you could have done all of this yourself. What are you here waiting for? It can't be that you really want my body, right? Lionel smiled, but for some reason, it didn't seem to travel to his eyes. There was something decidedly cold about the current atmosphere. I see. Wise Star Order finally spoke, the slight bubbliness of his words having faded. Stripped down of all its emotion, his voice wasn't exactly cold, but it was just a step away from robotic, as though there wasn't anything particularly human left of him. So you're a lot like me. It's no wonder my usual act doesn't work. Wise Star Order took a breath, but it seemed to be a habit rather than a necessity. You are a bit too naive, young one. The dimensional verse is far more vast than you can imagine, and a single wrong step could bring you ruin. Even being a savant isn't enough to guarantee anything. Just to get these fools to bide their time for 3 generations, I had to dedicate an entire lifetime to servitude. And, even then, I needed to kill a few idiots who wanted to ignore my prophecy. If it wasn't for the fact that I do indeed need your body, I would prefer to have you as a subordinate. You and I can see the world similarly, and I wouldn't have to worry about you doing something foolish. The latest _AP_SODIs are on _the website. Lionel chuckled. You should pick someone else's body. If you try to take mine, your immortality ability won't be worth much. I hope you choose smarter. Wise Star Order didn't seem to hear Lionel's words at all and instead sighed. If only I wasn't born human. What good is a soul manipulation ability if my soul is so weak? What good is being immortal if my body still rots after a couple centuries? Oh. Are there races with more powerful souls? Of course there are. Do you think I've wasted my years of life? My knowledge of the dimensional verse is beyond anything you can imagine. I've even left the human domain and traveled to places even those uppity cowards of the Void Palace don't dare to step foot in. I've seen a race of people who are born as nothing but souls. Their childhood is made up of nothing more than constructing the bodies they need to live in. Their souls are so powerful that each is like their own blazing sun. I've seen a race of people whose infants could kill a 6-dimensional expert with a single stomp. I've even seen a race of people that can swallow planets and shit out moons. The humans' race is so pathetically weak that I'm almost baffled they still dare to call themselves emperors and empresses in this domain. They're just lucky that this domain doesn't have an 8th-dimensional region, or else what peaceful existence they do have would be torn to shreds in an instant. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ing experience, but then again, pretty soon, this shitty human domain will have one, huh? By then, there'll be no place to hide. I already don't have any more time to waste in this place. I need this family to grow stronger so I can take those final steps, and your body is simply excellent. Your mind is robust so I won't have to shave off my own strength as much as I usually do. You have a high-class innate node usually only those elemental races can form, and it happens to be the perfect innate node to speed up my evolution through the 5 light star beasts. When I have enough strength, I can finally go retrieve the next tablet from those arrogant elemental races and touch upon the final stage of evolution. Plus, you're also a Moralis. Not worth much in the grand scheme, but in terms of humans, there's no better body to take. Oh. You know about the Moralis? Of course I do. Lionel could practically hear Wise Star Order's sneer. Even after I hid the secret of the tablet away from your grandmother for so many years, that bitch was still progressing too fast. You came at the most convenient time for me to finally stall her growth. I never understood why humans placed so much emphasis on their emotions. She could have long since rivaled the greatest experts of the human domain by now if she wasn't so soft. However, it's good for me this way. This family can only be led by me. Lionel suddenly laughed. You know, I originally felt quite bad for you. But now, I think it would just be best if you died. Visit. For a better user experience. Chapter 12-13. Wise Star Order seemed to be stunned for a moment before he chuckled. You're still pretending? You're not like everyone else. Lionel didn't respond, his gaze having turned a frightening cold. But, toward this, Wise Star Order only released his first genuine chuckle. He was truly stunned that Lionel had gotten mad at him. If Lionel was mad because he caused him to be harmed as a child, that was fine. In fact, Wise Star Order could understand that. He would be mad having been outclassed and manipulated as well. As for the fact that Lionel had quite literally been a baby at the time, Wise Star Order didn't seem to care. However, Lionel seemed to be enraged by the words Wise Star Order had said about his grandmother. To be mad about such a ridiculous thing. Wise Star Order laughed once more. I'll never understand, I really won't. Forget it, this is nothing more than a waste of my time. The tablet glowed and a vague figure emerged from it. It was clear that the reason Lionel hadn't been able to see Wise Star Order earlier was because he had been hiding away in the tablet. If the snowy star owl's gaze could see through the tablet so easily, it wouldn't be a six-dimensional creature. In fact, it would have to be maybe the most powerful existence in the dimensional verse. However, without the tablet's protection, Lionel could see Wise Star Order just fine. And, quite frankly, he looked like nothing one might expect. He was a man probably even more handsome than Elther. He exuded a cold aura that could make women swoon, and there was an arrogance in his gaze that looked down on the world. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ing experience, his hair was white and flowing, but his gaze was a gentle gold. The individual fibers of his irises layered atop of one another, giving the illusion that one was looking into a nebula lost in the depths of space. Even Lionel had to admit that this was a beautiful man. Maybe a bit too beautiful. As a child of the universe, blessed with the right to become a savant, maybe this was how he should look, though. Wise Star Order took a step through the air, appearing before Lionel in the blink of an eye. The pressure he exuded was enormous. Just with his soul alone, Lionel could feel a depth he couldn't even begin to fathom. There was no doubt that Wise Star Order in his current state was most definitely not in the fifth dimension. In fact, Lionel had a feeling that he wasn't in the sixth dimension either. At a minimum, the soul before him was in the lofty seventh dimension, a height that the current Lionel couldn't even grasp toward. The gap was simply enormous. When Wise Star Order said that his soul was fragile, that was only a matter of relativity. It didn't matter how fragile a seventh-dimensional soul was. To a fifth-dimensional being, it might as well have been a god ascended beyond a god. And yet, Lionel matched his gaze, a depth of cold detachment within them that seemed unmoved and unbothered. Wise Star Order scanned Lionel from top to bottom. The difference between them was so large that he didn't feel the need to rush. Plus, with how large the gap in their dimensions was, Lionel was indeed correct. He could read Lionel's mind. This didn't have much to do with his ability, but was rather a matter of a gap in dimensions. Reading Lionel was as easy as Lionel could read the pages of a book. This was what a true gap in dimensions represented, a gap that even Lionel couldn't close. Are you confident because of your mother? Your father, maybe? I must say that your father is indeed a man I have to fear. Unfortunately. He isn't here, and even he wasn't able to see through the protections of the tablet. As for your mother, she is powerful enough to eradicate the Luxnix single-handedly right now. But she is still within the sixth dimension. What threat does she pose to me? Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ing experience, Wise Star Order said these words and scanned Lionel again. But, nothing about his expression changed except for his smile becoming colder. I have over 10 million minds, each thinking different thoughts. You only have one to sift through them all. Those are odds I quite like. How about you? Lionel asked evenly. Wise Star Order's gaze turned colder. You overestimate yourself, young one. If you are so confident, why are you talking so much? Come on and try your luck. Lionel's gaze also became colder. The entire sector was focused on a singular arena hundreds of thousands of miles away from this place. The Luxnix estate seemed to be quite calm at this moment as well. No one seemed to be aware that a cold war with a weight beyond anything anyone could imagine was occurring right this moment in an inconspicuous temple. And then, Wise Star Order smiled brightly, suddenly turning into a beam of light that entered Lionel. Lionel's gaze flashed, his mind steeling itself and activating. He didn't trust his own reaction speed against a seventh-dimensional existence. For all he knew, the gap could be so wide that his mind would wipe instantaneously. As such, he set one of his S to take out the silver tablet and activate its personality-wiping function the instant Wise Star Order vanished into his body. It was a moment that occurred in less than a split second. The moment Lionel felt the cool sensation of the silver tablet entering his palms, he knew he had won. Without his personality, Wise Star Order's consciousness would be gone, leaving his soul as nothing more than a ball of energy without form. However, when the tablet flashed and Wise Star Order's soul was targeted, a sudden laughter resonated through Lionel's body. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ing experience, young one, like I told you before, you truly overestimate yourself. 10 million minds? Did you think that this was a feat? Even with a single mind I can have 10 million thoughts simultaneously and without effort. Scanning all of your thoughts and organizing which were decoys and which were reality was as easy as breathing. Do you think I was unaware of this trump card of yours? Lionel froze, feeling his body losing control of itself. Unfortunately, Lionel had made a great mistake. When Mila erased Ana's personality, he had to wait until she was in a state of absolute vulnerability. Her mind had to practically collapse first. Despite being her father and knowing that Ana would probably trust him to do it normally, he still had to take this approach. Why? The answer was simple. The tablet wasn't omnipotent. It couldn't just rush about erasing the minds of people as it pleased. It needed one's guard lowered to the greatest possible degree. A seventh-dimensional expert, 2 evolutions above Lionel, and completely on guard, was the exact opposite of the situation Lionel needed. Lionel's gaze flickered, its coldness fading and a sigh leaving his lips. It seems that his lack of information had finally caught up to him. There was only so much that could be done through deduction. The latest _AP_SODIes are on the website. His luck had run out. Chapter 12-14. Lionel didn't seem to be enraged. It was more so that he had already expected as much. It was an inevitable end. Every day he seemed to be learning about fascinating and great things, but too often these were matters that others were fully aware of, or could have been explained to him long ago. The fact that Wise Star Order mentioned going to seek out a second tablet after he had enough strength was enough to prove that he at least knew something about these matters, enough for him to be ready for everything Lionel was prepared to throw at him. Wise Star Order was correct, Lionel had overestimated himself. 10 million minds sound like a great feat and an enormous number, but one had to remember that the gap between dimensions was akin to the difference between mortals and gods. By the 5th dimension, millions probably shouldn't even be considered a large denomination anymore. The fact that Wise Star Order could treat it like a joke didn't really fill Lionel with humiliation. He just felt inadequate and foolish. Maybe he was an idiot for taking offense to Ana's lack of belief in him. She probably knew far more about the dimensional verse than he did. In that case, her reaction to his dream wasn't cruelty, it was just a dose of reality. The harshest realization of it all was that even if Lionel was correct and 10 million minds was far too much for Wise Star Order to sift through, it wouldn't matter. Even if he had caught Wise Star Order off guard, the silver tablet still wouldn't have been able to wipe his personality. Lionel thought that he might be enraged when he faced death, or feel fear, in the very least. But he didn't react those ways at all. Rather, it was almost like because he could see the logic behind his death, he could accept it. He didn't know how to feel about this. It was much less dramatic than the last time he almost died. Well, there were multiple of those times, but there were only 2 he could remember that truly felt so close. The second was of course this moment right now, and the first was the day he almost died at the hands of that Mayan girl. His guilt had reached such a peak at that time that he felt like he deserved to die. In a lot of ways, it was similar to this moment in that he saw the logic in it. Visit. For a better user experience, Lionel was rational and logical to a fault, or at least that was the way he liked to see himself. Because of this, he could never understand why some thought themselves to be better than another. There was no objective metric by which you could judge the value of a human being, there were only various lenses you could see worth through. Lionel's talent was seen as oh so valuable in the world he was currently in. But it was exactly just that. Only valuable in the world he was currently in. What if the dimensional verse was absolutely peaceful and they entered a world where battle prowess and the ability to throw the strongest punch was meaningless? Would his perceived value still be the same? In Lionel's mind, unless one could come up with an objective metric by which to value someone, all of this was just worthless. No matter what world you live in, 1 liter of water would remain 1 liter of water. 1 second of time would remain 1 second of time. The wavelength of blue would remain the wavelength of blue. Unless someone could give him the worth of a human with an objective, unadulterated, and indelible number, you could never convince Lionel otherwise. Maybe somewhere deep inside, Lionel was fascinated with finding out what this objective metric was. His fascination with crafts, his pursuit of unity and peace, maybe it was all because of this one purpose. But it didn't seem to matter much now. He had finally slipped up. Visit. For a better user experience, Lionel sighed. Old man, you really screwed me over this time. Lionel's mind flashed with images of his father before he stopped thinking altogether. He didn't feel like giving Wise Star Order the satisfaction. The only chance he had now was for his dad to realize that he was no longer Lionel. Maybe then he could get revenge from the afterlife. He wasn't mad at his father for not teaching him about the dimensional verse. No matter how much his father knew, there was a limit to his knowledge as well. Eventually, Lionel would run into something his father hadn't taught him, and then what? There was no way anyone could know everything about such a vast world. What would set people apart were those who were either lucky enough to never have to face the unknown, or powerful enough that the unknown didn't matter. Clearly, as lucky as Lionel was in life, he still wasn't lucky enough. And, as powerful as he thought he had become, he was still an ant. Lionel relaxed. But, what he hadn't expected was for the moment he did, for a shocked scream to ring through his mind. Lionel didn't seem to react to this like one should. He calmly turned his attention toward his ethereal glabella, the location Wise Star Order must have entered, and what he found made him raise an eyebrow. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ng experience, oh, I see. Lionel's almost deadpan voice filled Wise Star Order with an almost endless amount of fury. How is this here? How? I made sure to have them take your innate node out of you. Wise Star Order felt himself crumbling away beneath the might of Lionel's 7th star. It swirled about slowly, but menacingly, a harsh aura of destruction wafting outward. The moment Lionel was born, Wise Star Order had decided on his vessel. He was absolutely perfect, but the Scarlet Star innate node was too dangerous. It was deadly to practically anyone who came in contact with it, let alone a fragile soul. So, Wise Star Order devised a plan to have it taken out of Lionel. His original intention was to let Lionel grow without it, take over Lionel's body, and then snatch the innate node back from Miguel, thus completing his machinations. After all, there were certain troubles associated with transplanting high-level innate nodes that would act as stumbling blocks for Miguel, slowing his progress enough for Wise Star Order to overtake him with ease even with Lionel as a starting point. However, even with all his vast stores of knowledge, he could have never expected that Lionel would regrow his innate node. How was that even possible? He had traveled so much, seen so much, absorbed so much. But he had never heard of such a thing. Lionel watched as Wise Star Order struggled, his emotions hardly fluctuating. It was like it wasn't his life being saved right this moment at all, almost as though he was watching a movie from a third perspective. He was simply unmoved by it all. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ng experience, he didn't feel any happiness or relief. Instead, I guess I really am just lucky. You should have feared my father more. Chapter 12-15. It was quite ironic. Just earlier today, Lionel's grandmother was warning him about the dangers of Scarlet Star Force. Her exact words were that Scarlet Star Force was one of the only forces she knew of that could cause harm to a higher dimensional being while even at a lower dimensional level. However, when faced with Wise Star Order, Lionel hadn't even considered using it. Firstly, whatever damage a force could land required it to actually land in the first place. Lionel had no confidence in landing an attack on a seventh-dimensional being. Wise Star Order had already proven that his mind worked even faster than Lionel's own. It was foolish to even consider such a thing. Secondly, Lionel had still underestimated his own innate node. Even though he remembered the words his grandmother had said, he didn't think that this would apply across two-dimensional levels. Though Lionel had fought six-dimensional experts in the past without the use of his Scarlet Star Force, there were multiple factors to take into account. For one, they were exceptionally weak amongst six-dimensional beings. Compared to the six-dimensional existences of the Luxnix family or seventh-dimensional families, it could only be said that the mere fact they could share the same title was grace enough. The second important point was the environment. Because of the preparations Lionel had made, the core abilities a six-dimensional existence should have weren't accessible, thus weakening them further. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ng experience third, Lionel had a detailed breakdown of all of their abilities ahead of time thanks to the detailed report of the radix. With the opportunity to set up a battle plan ahead of time, he was at too great of an advantage. And finally, Lionel's body was built on the foundation of the lineage factor of a pinnacle seventh-dimensional family, and he had brought it to just a single step away from the sixth dimension before the battle even began. Yet, even with all of these advantages, that battle had almost cost him his life. Knowing all of this, when faced with a seventh-dimensional existence like Wise Star Order, even Lionel was a bit baffled by the result. This was especially so because Wise Star Order wasn't a normal seventh-dimensional existence. It had to be remembered that savants could not access the strength everyone else could. This meant that they couldn't progress through the dimensions like everyone else could, nor could they comprehend universal forces. This was the exchange they made for the power they were granted. This meant that the seventh-dimensional pressure Lionel was feeling from Wise Star Order wasn't a result of his true dimension level, but rather a reflection of how much he had honed his ability throughout the years. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ng experience Lionel had assumed that because Wise Star Order's ability was tethered to his soul's mobility and immortality, that it would naturally translate into its durability. And that it did. The issue wasn't durability, but rather durability in comparison to a corporeal body. Why was it that a supposed seventh-dimensional being was forced to bide his time and scheme as he had? Why did he go so far to cover up his ability as a savant, even to the point of fabricating the birth of several Northern Star Orders in order to hide his trail, and even spending an entire lifetime as a good Samaritan, all to ensure that the maximum number of individuals possible would believe his philosophy? Didn't it all point toward him not being as powerful as he seemed? A savant like Weiss would always be able to protect himself because as he grew, his ability to lock space would continue along with him. What did he have to fear if everyone around him couldn't move? A savant like Candle would always be able to protect herself because as she grew, her ability to reflect attacks would grow along with her. What did she have to fear if every assault levied toward her was reflected back toward her enemy? A savant like Monkey would always be able to protect himself as he grew, his ability to multiply his strength seemingly indefinitely would always grow along with him. What did he have to fear if there seemed to be no end to the strength of his fist and the number of copies of himself he could make? Visit. For a better user experience, all of the savants that Lionel had met to this point had abilities that directly translated to strength or excellent defense. But what would you do when you were a savant like Wise Star Order? You would, presumably, be born in a family that treasured power. But, you could display none of your own in your youth. All you had was your clever mind and a title bestowed to you by a mysterious entity with a purpose you knew nothing of. In that sort of situation, what would you do? Wouldn't you have to bide your time and scheme? Hopping from valuable body to valuable body, strengthening it to reach your goals and then abandoning it before it died of old age? Wouldn't you be forced to do exactly what the current wise star order had done? But ultimately, your innate disposition would still be fragile and weak. As much as wise star order had tempered his soul over the years, compared to a true seventh-dimensional existence, it was lacking considerably. While his soul was leaps and bounds above what one could expect from even a seventh-dimensional being's soul, when compared to a seventh-dimensional being's body, it was several steps below. Visit. For a better user experience, the soul was ultimately a fragile construct. Even when supplemented with such a powerful ability, this fact didn't change. In fact, Wise Star Order's soul was only about as durable as Lionel's body would be once he brought his metal body to the sixth dimension. Wise Star Order had been a man who took every step meticulously, making sure to cover his bases, had actually fallen to a boy due to bad luck just when all his years of diligent planning were finally about to pay off. Wasn't his life far too meaningless? Chapter 12:16. There was one large matter that still left Lionel deep in thought, though. The soul manipulation ability was more than just about a soul being able to exist without its body for extended periods of time and giving the soul shape. It came with a great boost in intelligence similar to other mental type abilities, came with an enormous boost in soul durability, and, most importantly, came with extraordinarily sensitive senses. Honestly, when Lionel had read the description of the Soul Manipulation Ability Index, he had assumed that Tier 5 practically aligned with an indestructible soul. But hearing the screams of pain and agony of Wise Star Order, even to the point he couldn't even maintain his form properly anymore, Lionel realized that at least that assumption had been wrong. But what about the rest? With the sensitivity of a person with a soul manipulation ability, it should definitely be far beyond Lionel's own. Was it not possible to sense? Lionel actually wasn't sure. He had been walking around with a massive ticking time bomb in his right kidney, but no one had ever said anything about it. In fact, now that he thought about it, his grandmother, who also had senses far beyond himself, warned him to watch out for Miguel. From her words, it was clear that she was also unaware. When Lionel's thoughts led him down this road, he realized there was another person whose ignorance was a bit baffling. Lionel wasn't sure of the abilities of the world spirit, at least not entirely, but he would think that his mother's internal sight was probably pretty powerful as well. But she hadn't said anything about his regrown innate node either. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ng experience previously, Lionel hadn't linked all of these things because he wasn't aware that regrowing an innate node was so impossible. It was only after he heard Wise Star Order's shock that he put two and two together, finally understanding why his grandmother was so worried. No one but he was aware that he had regrown his node. Even those he fought at Valiant Heart Mountain, back during the last time he had been forced to use it, all died at his hands. I see. Is this a sort of protection? Or is it something else? Wise Star Order didn't even notice that my innate node was back until he ran into my 7th star. He didn't confirm until then. Interesting, HH. Young one. You win. You win. I yield. Lionel, who had tuned out Wise Star Order's screams, raised a brow. Honestly, Lionel wasn't being neglectful. He was ignoring Wise Star Order because there wasn't much he could do in this situation other than observe the status quo. While he could take control of his 7th star to absorb more Scarlet Star Force, he would just end up hurting himself. And, quite frankly, Wise Star Order's wisdom was beyond his own. He clearly lived up to his name. This wasn't a man Lionel could just outsmart because he wanted to. Why couldn't you sense my innate node? Visit. For a better user experience, Wise Star Order, who was experiencing the pain of a lifetime, was speechless. What the hell was this little brat asking him right now? But he seemed to want to grasp onto the last strand of hope he had, so he answered. He and Lionel weren't exactly normal people to begin with. Maybe there really was no better time than now for this. I couldn't sense your innate node even if I wanted to. Even now I can't. The only explanation is that it's grown to a point where it will return to nature soon. Return to nature? My innate node will leave me? Lionel blinked, not liking the sound of this. No. Wise Star Order grit his teeth, doing his best not to call Lionel a fucking idiot. Forces on the level of Scarlet Star Force are called true state forces. There are only a few and each represents the greatest pinnacle of a particular element. When it returns to nature, it means that it is in perfect union with its surroundings and is accepted by both your body and the universe. Wise Star Order felt like bashing his head against a wall. The philosophy behind this was deep and complex, but it felt like thousands of drills were twisting into his body at once. How could he focus on this lesson and that at the same time? The appearance of an innate node comes with a phenomena. The more powerful the innate node, the more powerful the phenomena. Usually babies like you die, but your father was powerful enough to protect you, so you lucked out. This phenomena represents the fury of the universe as you are stealing something from it. This punishment is even worse for humans than certain other races. The pinnacle state an individual with an innate node can reach is a return to nature state. That's a stage where your innate node is no longer a foreign object but rather becomes a true part of yourself. Similar to a savant, the burden of usage drastically lowers when such a state is reached. Visit. For a better user experience, the beginning stages of this transition is denoted by a large influx and increased concentration of natural force nodes, and you will begin to hear your force nodes speak to you. Wise Star Order spoke these words as fast as he could, expelling them almost like hot air. If it wasn't for Lionel's thinking speed, he probably wouldn't have picked up on all of it. Lionel's gaze lit up. Oh. That sounds great. Wise Star Order, probably pissed off by Lionel's reactions, just sneered deeply, a cold laughter filling Lionel's mind. I don't know what you did to be approaching such a state so early, but it's not a good thing for you by any stretch of the imagination, especially not with the nature of Scarlet Star Force. At your pace, within 100 years your innate node will return to its natural state. Usually, only those old bastards of the elemental races who've seen tens of thousands of years of life would be able to reach that stage. Their minds are far stronger than yours and their paths have already been set in stone. But you're nothing more than a little brat with a ticking time bomb hovering somewhere within his body. If your innate node returns to nature without you fully comprehending and grasping it, it'll be controlling you, not the other way around. Visit. For a better user experience. Chapter 12:17. Controlling me? It's just a source of energy. Lionel's brow furrowed. The disdain in Wise Star Order's short silence spoke volumes. However, Lionel waited patiently. After all, it wasn't his soul suffering in infernal hell. Wise Star Order could be as disdainful as he wanted, he didn't care. It's not just a source of energy, fool. Wise Star Order no longer held back. Since he had already acknowledged that Lionel was a lot like him, he also understood that there was no point in holding back. Whether or not he was nice with his words didn't matter. Lionel had already decided whether he would care to listen to his proposal or not, everything else was meaningless. In the lower dimensions, energy might just be energy. But, the higher the dimension, the more energy gains character of its own. Why do you think universal force relies on comprehension? Why do you think artistic conception can become so powerful? Why is the dividing line between mortality and the God path the unshackling of the mind and the visualization of the fifth dimension? Lower dimensional worlds have no idea where consciousness comes from, they think that it just sprouts up from nowhere. Your Earth is a bit more interesting as it leaned very heavily into science, far better than those primitive third-dimensional worlds that could barely boil water, but even they were lacking. It's not a secret where consciousness comes from, consciousness is birthed from energy. The forces of the dimensional verse all represent certain kernels of truth, certain philosophies, and embody certain values. When a living creature is born, they are the result of an amalgamation of these forces. Life, at its root, is just a random assortment of these vast energies. Who you are as a person is randomly decided by how these energies come together. Visit. For a better user experience, why is it that savants have minds that work so much differently from normal individuals? It's because they are so hyper-talented in one area that we lose the well-roundedness many others have. The result is a fixation on one path and an imbalance in personality that those who can't see the world the way we do find odd and feel a need to fit into a box. Every force in existence has a disposition it slants to. The closer to a true state force you become, the more the weeds are cut away and the more striking a singular powerful thought remains. By now, I'm sure you know exactly what that singular thought for your Scarlet Star force is. Lionel's gaze narrowed. Destruction. Lionel's mind began to piece these things together. So it seemed that when he tried to force the formation of his 10th node, feeling that his body was missing something, he had accidentally caused the accelerated growth of his innate node. Right now, it was much larger and much more powerful than it should have been. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ing experience, Wise Star Order had said it would take 100 years. Lionel didn't know how true or false this was. But, what he did know was that in the grand scheme, 100 years wasn't a lot of time. A sixth-dimensional existence could live for over 500 years without much issue. A seventh-dimensional existence could experience over 1,000 years and live into the several thousands. Lionel wasn't sure about beyond that, but from what it sounded like from Wise Star Order's words, eighth-dimensional existences were indeed real, and they lived on the order of tens of thousands. These numbers didn't become outrageously large to Lionel until the seventh dimension. There were people back on Earth who could live past 200 years old, so it wasn't too much of a culture shock to him below that. It was just that this wasn't the norm for the rest of the dimensional verse. This aside, saying Lionel had 100 years left was like putting a looming guillotine over his head. If his Scarlet Star Force had as much potential as he thought, maybe only the pinnacle of the eighth dimension could compare. There was simply no way Lionel could comprehend anything to that depth in such a short time. Those long lifespans weren't just for show, that was how much time it took even the most gifted to reach those levels. I see, Lionel's gaze sharpened. His feelings about his previous close shave with death practically rolled off his shoulders as though it had never happened. He had already accepted that his luck was a large part of the reason he could stand here today. He wouldn't let his close call force him to waver. In fact, he felt that his mind was firmer and he already wasn't far from Tier 5. He seemed to be blazing through the fifth dimension just as fast as he had the third. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ing experience. I will hear you out and thanks for this information, it's greatly helpful to me. Why should I save you after you tried to kill me instead of waiting until you're weak enough for the silver tablet to work on you? Lionel wasn't entirely sure how it worked, but what he was sure of was the fact that memory and personality were separate thanks to his experience with Aina. That meant that if he used the silver tablet, it shouldn't affect Wise Star Order's memories, theoretically. However, as for whether this would allow Lionel to absorb them, Lionel had no idea. It was a nice thought, but he wasn't sure if it was a thought he had had from watching too much anime with his dad or if it was feasible. He also wasn't even sure where he would absorb it. He didn't have a tangible soul with a form like Wise Star Order did. For all he knew, after his personality was erased, Wise Star Order's soul would just slowly dissipate. It might be more feasible if Wise Star Order used Dream Force, which Lionel had an exceptionally high affinity in. But from what it seemed, Wise Star Order used regular Soul Force. There was also the problem of how strong Wise Star Order's soul was. It was definitely far stronger than Lionel's own. Would Lionel's mind implode if he tried to absorb it? Lionel simply knew too little to act. There were far too many variables. The latest _AP_SODIs are on the website. Realizing this was his chance, Wise Star Order pounced on it. I can guide you. Chapter 12:18. Lionel was tempted to probe Wise Star Order by just saying, "Why would I accept that when I can just take your memories for myself?" But, he decided against it for the moment. He had no confidence in bluffing Wise Star Order, at least not with something he was so ignorant of. Trying to do so would just put him on the losing end. Why would I trust any advice you give me? I have a technique. Wise Star Order replied just as quickly, clearly already prepared. In my travels, I've come across a lot. In the race I mentioned born as souls, they have many soul-related techniques. They're called the spirituals. The technique is the technique. It binds the two of our souls into one and ties our fates. So long as one of us dies, the other will as well. This will ensure that I can't harm you. When Lionel heard this, he sneered. You expect me to believe that you're willing to use this technique? This is essentially you giving up your immortality. Do you take me for an idiot? If it was anything else, Lionel might have been inclined to believe it initially, but this was too ridiculous. Without Lionel's influence, Wise Star Order was an immortal. If he tied his life and death to Lionel, he was losing an infinite amount of lifespan. Lionel would never believe something so ridiculous. Of course, the other path laid before Wise Star Order was to die right now. But, Lionel still felt that this ancestor of his would choose hundreds of paths before he chose this one. Just looking at how scared he was to die even after living for so long spoke volumes. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ing experience on top of that, the idea of tying his life to someone else disgusted Lionel. He wasn't sure why, but it left him deeply uncomfortable, almost as though he was compromising his sense of self for a person who he didn't even trust. He couldn't explain it beyond this. Wise Star Order furiously shook his head. There's no such thing as true immortality in this world. Just being in the presence of your Scarlet Star Force is shaving years off of me. At best, I would just live 100 or so times the lifespan of a normal individual of the 8th dimension. I've already lived over 20% of my time through. Lionel's expression didn't change much to this response. He had somewhat expected it. True immortality seemed a bit exaggerated. But even then, Wise Star Order was giving up hundreds of thousands of years. Lionel wouldn't live nearly so long. Seeing that Lionel wasn't biting even after this, Wise Star Order's expression fluttered wildly, being antsy. Every moment he spent here, he lost decades off his life. Even for him, he would soon run out. The destructive capabilities of this force were way too potent. He was right to take precautions against it while Lionel was a baby, but who knew that things would still turn out this way? All right, sure. Lionel smiled. Unfortunately, before Wise Star Order could get excited, Lionel spoke again. I will call my dad here and he will inspect your technique in my stead. If he says that there's nothing wrong with it, we can go ahead with your idea. Wise Star Order's expression changed wildly and he began to cough. There's no need to do this, right? Why not? It's just a small measure. He's pretty fast, he will probably get here soon. It's not too much of a problem. He's a bit of a dick sometimes, but he's a good father. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ing experience Wise Star Order panicked. Hell definitely kill me. He won't agree at all. Don't you want to grow on your own outside of your father's shadow? They'll always call you his son unless you can surpass him. Do you have any idea the kind of weight the name Velasco Morales holds? The agitation in Wise Star Order's voice only seemed to grow. No. I'm actually very okay with being a second-generation wastrel, I've already accepted it. Today my arrogance almost got me killed, I have no intention of going through that again. I have no ambition any longer and I'll just live out the rest of my life in peace, find a beautiful wife, have a few kids, you damned brat. You're messing with me while I'm dying? Lionel chuckled coldly. It's you who is playing with your own life. I have all the time in the world. Keep trying to play me for a fool and your sand will run out. Wise Star Order grit his teeth, his fury almost palpable. His soul wavered in and out of existence almost as though it might flicker out completely any moment now. What do you want? Wise Star Order squeezed out. It's simple. I'm sure that among those techniques of yours, there's an enslavement method. I don't doubt it, after all, that's the only reason you'd have so much confidence right now. You probably believe that you'll be able to take control of me one way or another. Visit. For a better user experience, I want that method. You have hundreds of thousands of years left to live. As for me, even if I make it to the 8th dimension, I will still only have a small fraction of that. If I don't, well, you'll be set free even sooner than that. That's the price. Exchange my lifetime in your servitude and I will let you go. If not, well, rot in hell, ancestor. Lionel's ultimatum was straight to the point and held not a single thing back. He sat in leisure, waiting for Wise Star Order's response. And, surprisingly, it came not too long later. I agree. Good. Smart men don't waste time with meaningless things. Give me the formula for the technique, I will analyze it myself. You won't call that man here, right? I may have been trying to trick you before, but he really would kill me. You, my dad? Lionel laughed. Don't worry, I have methods outside of him to deal with this. Lionel looked at the dictionary in his palm. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ing experience without a word, Wise Star Order began to use the last dregs of his energy to push the technique outward. Chapter 12:19. Lionel took his time. He wasn't trying to torture Wise Star Order, but it was rather that he wouldn't play games with his own life. The technique that Wise Star Order passed on to him was unlike anything Lionel had ever seen before. It almost made all the force art languages that he had learned to this point seem like chicken scratch. Ancestor said that this technique came from the spirituals race. Is the gap this large? His gaze couldn't help but narrow. The difference was akin to going from a coding language filled with redundancies to one that was elegant and streamlined. In fact, what was particularly beautiful about this force art language was that it didn't seem constrained in the same way the others Lionel had come to know were. For example, the Morales family's force art was best used for crafting. The Luxnix family's force art was best used to form beast constructs. However, the force art of the spirituals seemed like it could do it all. It was so perfect that there wasn't a single weakness. After a while, though, Lionel realized that it was just an illusion. It wasn't that this force art language had no weaknesses, it was rather that the weaknesses weren't visible from his perspective and weren't nearly as glaring. It was likely that this force art worked perfectly for specific use cases related to the soul, but Lionel wouldn't be surprised if the spirituals had other languages to deal with other matters. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ing experience, Lionel couldn't help but be intrigued. He suddenly wanted to know a lot more about this race and how they built their understanding of force arts to this level. Lionel had no intention of switching his force arts. Though this force art system seemed to have no weaknesses and it could perform all sorts of tasks, how well it could do them was a separate matter. It was this that made Lionel realize that the spirituals must have other force arts. But to think that a force art not even created for those purposes could still fulfill them. What about those designed for crafting? How much better are they? The only shame was that Lionel didn't know enough about soul-related matters to understand just how magical this force art language was. To have the ability to tether things as fragile as souls, while simultaneously not causing any harm to them was baffling. Just to understand how great of a feat this was, most humans couldn't even grasp the concept of a soul, even Lionel didn't know where his was or how to sense it. Yet, just by observing this technique, Lionel could feel an odd emotion welling up within him. It was similar to that feeling one got when they stared into the mirror for too long, that feeling that told you that maybe the you that you were looking at wasn't actually you. The more you stared, the more foreign the you had always known seemed, and the more difficult it became to reconcile with the fact that nothing had changed from the moment you started to this moment here. Something stirred within him. First it felt as though he was gazing upon the formation with his eyes. And then it felt like he was gazing upon it with his mind. And then it suddenly felt as though he was gazing upon it with something even deeper than his mind. Visit. For a better user experience, Lionel's ethereal glabella stirred, the rotation of his 7 stars becoming faster and faster. Fuck. Y's star order felt like banging his head against a wall. This was his last chance. This stupid fool had actually lost himself in meditation. The force arts of the spirituals were very unique, and Lionel's analysis of it could only, at best, be considered to be about 10 to 20% accurate, with the rest of it being nonsense. The spirituals had a very unique way of protecting their intellectual property and their discoveries. Most outside their race that gaze upon their force arts would feel as though their souls were being ripped out from their bodies. Eventually, exactly that would happen. Then, the use of the force art would change and one's soul would become entrapped. Once this occurred, they would become nourishment for the force art and breathe life into it, causing a self-destruction sequence of the intelligence to take place. But, why was Lionel's soul actually so sturdy? Visit. For a better user experience, son of a bitch, who the hell has dream force affinity this high? Y's star order suddenly realized that he really was out of luck this time. He didn't have any more tricks up his sleeve. In order to ensure that Lionel trusted him as much as possible, he had even been forced to give the real deal over. Lionel had managed to sense his soul before the force art could rip it out. And, with his dream force affinity, he could take control of it before anything bad happened. The force art of the spirituals originally didn't have any force within it, it was just a drawing. Only by using the soul of the spectator as fuel could it then self-destruct. Its main design was created to use a meditation trick to fool the ignorant into letting their souls free, but it didn't actually have any strong suction force of its own. Fuck. 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 I hate this kid. Once Lionel grasped the technique properly, he was finished. He wouldn't be able to hide anything from Lionel, and even all his lies would be seen right through. He would be a true slave, and there was nothing he could do about it. It was all too infuriating. A slow breath left Lionel's lips. His mind felt so much clearer than it ever had before. Though his number of split minds hadn't increased, his thinking speed felt like it had doubled, making the effectiveness of the split minds he already had increased by at least a fold. The latest _AP_SODIs are on the website. His gaze sharpened and his understanding of dream force seemed to have jumped forward another measure. Lionel suddenly had little doubt that his simulations would be even more accurate than they had been in the past. Let's begin, then. Chapter 12:20. Y's star order deflated. As expected, after sensing the fringes of his soul for the first time, Lionel grasped the technique not too long after, especially considering that it wasn't much of a technique, per se was a contract. So long as you had the skill to draw the force art, there wasn't much else to it. And, the fact that Y's star order was just a soul and didn't have a body made it even easier, not to mention the fact he was already within Lionel's ethereal glabella. Drawing a force art within his own domain like that made things easy on him. Soon, Y's star order found himself bound, his mind and thoughts completely opened up to Lionel. The only saving grace about this matter was that he was finally not being continuously assaulted with pain because he could finally leave Lionel's mind. Y's star order didn't seem to be doing too good. Aside from the fact his expression was dark, he had suffered no small amount of injury, and the result was him being nothing but misty fog from the waist down. Even some of his torso got the same treatment. He gazed toward Lionel deeply, but Lionel himself was still a bit enraptured by that mystical feeling this force art had given him. But, unfortunately, it didn't feel nearly as good as the first time. It was like the trick no longer worked on him anymore. Your dream force affinity is abnormal. Y's star order said coldly. What is abnormal about it? It's just related to my ability. Lionel said casually. No. It's abnormal. Your affinity is what you would expect from a savant, but you're clearly not one. I would bet that you haven't even truly stepped into tier 4 of your ability. It makes little to no sense. Visit. For a better user experience, Lionel raised an eyebrow. He looked up to meet his ancestor's gaze. But then he soon realized that he didn't need to observe him to know whether he was lying or not. their connection told him all he needed to know. It seemed he would have to flex this muscle a bit more because it required him getting a feel for his soul and sensing what it was telling him. It was almost like he had gained a new limb and he needed to learn how to use it. I haven't stepped into tier 4 of my ability. I thought I had already. Lionel was a bit off-put by this as well. The tier of your ability can't be decided by how it functions in a 5th or 6th dimensional world. What are you thinking? Then is it decided by how it works in a 7th dimensional one? Lionel asked. He hadn't ever felt his ability dip down in strength when going between worlds, so he always just assumed it never would. No, fool. Your father was born in a 7th dimensional world. Why would your ability take a dip down in one? The true strength of an ability is decided by how it performs on a void battlefield. A void battlefield? Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ing experience Wise Star Order side. It seems that this would be his life now. Guiding a literal toddler to learn about things almost anyone would already know about. They're the locations between domains. The pressure they exude is unlike anything you've experienced. Even those born on 8th dimensional worlds cannot take them lightly. From what I can see, your ability would be at best at the lower reaches of Tier 3 on even the weakest void battlefield. In the worst case, it would fall near the higher reaches of Tier 2. Lionel's brows shot up. That was an enormous change. The levels of Lionel's ability were opening, awakening, visualization, control and finally manifestation. He could still stand it if his ability fell to Tier 3 because visualization was what he probably used the most often. If he fell out of Tier 4, he would lose access to abilities like Dream Counter and Dream Sense, but it wouldn't be the end of the world. Falling out of Tier 3, though. That would be an enormous hit to his battle prowess. Visualization allowed Lionel to recreate objects and simulate reality in his mind. If he lost that, he would lose his Dreamscape, Dream Sculpt, Dream Clone. Practically all of his abilities' best strength would vanish. All Tier 2, the awakening level could give Lionel was an added sensory perception and his Dream Force affinity. But, because his ability couldn't project Dream Force like other Dream Force-related abilities could, this was all but useless. Lionel's expression went through several changes. He had never expected something like this. Visit. For a better user experience, how do I strengthen my ability? Wise Star Order really didn't want to answer, but it seemed he didn't really have a choice. Didn't you just take the first step? Comprehend Dream Force more. That's the root of everything you can do. But you already said my Dream Force affinity is higher than it should be. Then why would my ability level be so low on a void battlefield? Since when did affinity have anything to do with comprehension? In fact, the higher your affinity, the tougher it makes it in some respects. People like you just do without understanding, and it's a detriment. Lionel almost couldn't help but chuckle at this. The irony was palpable. He spent so long running away from doing things on instinct, and yet he had neglected what he relied on instinct the most to do. From the very beginning, everything related to his ability came naturally to him, and things only got better after he swapped out Soul Force for Dream Force. Now that Lionel was aware, though, the change he had to make was simple. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ing experience he just had one other pressing question, one that was burning at the back of his mind. He would never forgive himself for not getting an answer to it. How the hell do I stop old bastards like you from reading my mind? I don't like it. And, last chapter for today, love. Chapter 12:21. Lionel and Wise Star Order fell into a full-blown back and forth, much to the latter's chagrin. However, there was no escaping it. If he wanted to make his life the smallest bit easier, he had no choice but to follow along with Lionel's wishes. The only way to protect your mind from higher dimensional beings is by using a higher dimensional treasure. I don't have a 7th dimensional treasure just lying around. If I did, would I have almost died to you? Give me a better answer than that. There's no better answer. There's just the answer and nothing else. What do you take me for? I can't just conjure things up out of thin air. Can't you just protect my mind for me? Are you an idiot? Seventh-dimensional existences can tell the difference. You want to expose the fact you have a savant in your head? They'll probably think that you're being controlled by me and they'll kill first and ask questions later. What the hell is this? Didn't you say my dad was OP? Wouldn't these seventh-dimensional old fogies think twice about doing that? Op? What is that supposed to mean? It means overpowered. Then say as much. Are you slow in the head? You can't say words like you mean them and have to abbreviate things. I swear, every generation gets more foolish than the last. Species are supposed to evolve over time, not the opposite. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ng experience, stop changing the subject, old man. Can't you just stick to the topic? It's not my fault you don't understand simple things. The more powerful your father is, the more trouble that brings you. You think people become strong without making enemies? Even if they don't dare to oppose him openly, if they have good enough grounds to target you, they wouldn't hesitate to do so. Something like your mind being taken over by me is more than good enough grounds. Lionel shook his head. Just tell me whether I can use my dad's name to scare people or not. What is wrong with you? Wise Star Order was truly speechless. You think I was joking about being a second-generation wastrel? I've been using my dad's status to break the law since I was in middle school. I have no intention of stopping now. That old man must have known, that's why he hid all of this from me. I have too much catching up to do. Wise Star Order looked up toward the ceiling and sighed. Why hadn't he realized just how shameless this little bastard was until right this moment? Who the hell said they had law-breaking to catch up on? Where was this young man's dignity and moral compass? If there was any guilt about trying to snatch Lionel's body before, it had all vanished into thin air now. Wise Star Order had a feeling that following this boy around would be far more dangerous than all of his previous adventures combined. If you want to get yourself killed, just be sure to release me before that happened. Your father might be able to run rampant in Void Palace as he pleases, but you definitely cannot. Having backing only works if it's actually there. And, from what I understand, the Void Palace selections should still be ongoing right now, and yet you're here. On top of that, there's a golden token in your spatial ring already. That means that your mother just handed it to you without you earning it. If you think that that doesn't come with consequences, you have another thing coming. Lionel chuckled. It really would be his luck to end up like this. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ng experience in all the books and anime he had watched, those with backgrounds always had it easy. How is it that he would end up in trouble because he had one? Where was the justice here? That said, Lionel didn't particularly care. Entering Void Palace was too important. While he hated relying on other people, his parents were an exception. He had been like that since he was young. He wouldn't give most people the time of day, but his mother and his father were two he would accept the kindness of without batting an eyelash. It was just that his father's kindness had to be taken a bit more forcefully. Never mind all of that. I bet the Luxnicks have a treasure that fits the bill though, right? Maybe something in your secret stash. I doubt that you've traveled the world for so long and haven't laid your hands on any treasures for yourself. Wise Star Order's lip twitched as he stared daggers at Lionel. He really wanted to say no, but he could already feel Lionel's soul probing him. Finally, he spoke through gritted teeth. Yes, I have treasure stores of my own, but there's only one deposit on this planet and the others aren't easy to reach without adequate strength. Also, the one here might be easily accessible, but it's nowhere near as valuable as the other ones. What are you so nervous for? I'll only steal from you when the time comes. Wise Star Order's face stiffened. Was this supposed to be a consolation? The question is whether or not this treasure store of yours has what I need or not. If it doesn't, there wouldn't really be much of a point in unearthing it now. Visit. For a better user experience, Wise Star Order took a deep breath. Yes, it should probably have something that's appropriate for your needs. But, you really don't need it. So long as you can comprehend more of your innate node, anyone who tries to get a read on you would see nothing but an endless black hole. Didn't you say some nonsense about how there's no better answer before? Now look at you. Lionel stood, shaking his head. Where are you going? Obviously to your treasure store. How long would it take me to be able to grasp my innate node to such a degree? At least a few years. Exactly, now let's go. Wise Star Order almost felt tears falling from his eyes. Was he really going to spend a lifetime being bullied by a junior like this? However, Wise Star Order's terrible mood didn't last for long when his face suddenly brightened up. Haha. You've been found out. Karma really does exist. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ng experience. Lionel's gaze flickered, suddenly feeling several powerful auras converging toward the temple. But then, a light bulb suddenly snapped to life within him and he grinned wildly. What are you laughing for? Come here, ancestor. Let's put on a show. Wise Star Order's face warped. Chapter 1222. When the Luxniks learned of what happened, they were quite baffled. About 10 minutes after Lionel had passed through the guard and made his way to the temple, the guard in question realized that there was something wrong. The star pendant wasn't something that could be given out casually, and all the times it had been given out had been well documented. There shouldn't have been a situation where a pendant holder was unknown to him as a guard. In fact, the last time the pendant was given out was several decades ago due to matters surrounding that incident. Simply put, no one as young, green, or weak as Lionel should have had the pendant in their possession. Of course, a member of the older generation could have handed down their pendant to a junior to make use of this opportunity, and there was nothing necessarily wrong with this as it could be used as the receiver pleased. But something about this matter was still nagging at the guard. For the same logical reasoning as he had concluded previously, he should still know of Lionel. Any descendant prominent enough to be trusted by an elder-level character to such a degree should have been widely known. And, the only one with such cachet that he could think of was Miguel. But Lionel was obviously not Miguel, and Miguel had free rein to enter the temple whenever and for however long he pleased. It was already too late for the guard to go after Lionel to question him. He was under strict orders to never step foot in that temple. The secret within was something only the highest echelon of the family would be aware of, not even all of the Star Order Council were in the know. The latest _AP_SODIs are on the website. Without a choice, he could only report this matter up and hope that he was being too cautious, or if he was truly in the wrong, that the punishment would be lenient. Due to these series of roundabout methods, Lionel ended up spending over a half hour with Wise Star Order, only to find himself surrounded the moment he wanted to step out. However, as shocked as the Luxniks had been that such a faux pas occurred, they were even more so when Lionel strolled out of the front entrance of the temple as though nothing at all had happened. The temple had two entrances. One from the underground city, and the second was the one Miguel had used the night he fought Aina. This entrance was located deep within the furthest reaches of the Luxniks estate and was the most well protected. All around, there were the homes of Star Order elders. Even the Patriarch's personal home could only sit at the outer reaches of this location. So, when several Pinnacle six-dimensional existences converged onto their most treasured place, ready to face whatever threat had finally unearthed their deepest secrets, even managing to steal a star pendant of their family to complete the final steps, the last thing they expected to see was a young man a fraction of their age walking out with his hands in his pockets. Even if there had been no one there at all, it would have been easier to accept than the result that lay before them now. The elders immediately frowned deeply. The reason was obvious. They could sense a dense Luxnik's blood coming from Lionel. With the sharp internal sight their snow force affinity gave them, this was far too easy to pick up on. This sort of density overshadowed even the arm heads of this generation. What was going on? Visit. For a better user experience, Lionel smiled lightly and scanned the crowd. When he landed on a particular older woman, his brows raised. It's you? Sparking Star Order's gaze narrowed. Her mind was sharp even in her old age. Plus, the impression Lionel had left on her wasn't too small, as he was one of the only two to stand up to her aura. Back then, she hadn't cared enough to properly scan Lionel, but realizing just how dense his blood was, she couldn't help but be off-put. Sparking Star Order, you know this brat? He should be a member of the branch families. Sparking Star Order started slow before her eyes sharpened. He was invited into the estate by Fluttering Star Order. The atmosphere of the elders completely shifted when they heard this. Though Sparking Star Order didn't elaborate, they all jumped to the conclusion together. Was Fluttering Star Order responsible for Lionel entering the temple? How dare she? Sometimes not saying too much was worth more than laying everything on the table. A conclusion reached personally would always be stronger than one fed to you line by line, especially when the person in question was as biased against Fluttering Star Order as she was. Wrong. Visit. For a better user experience, Lionel's voice shook the elders awake, their auras locking onto him with a greater momentum this time. Obviously, they all believed that Lionel was lying to cover for his benefactor. Do you take us for fools? Sparking Star Order sneered. You're wrong. Lionel shook his head. You're saying that I'm lying? That Fluttering Star Order didn't invite you here? That's not what I meant, Lionel yawned. He was a bit tired after finishing his second divine armor, but he hadn't gotten time to rest since then, unfortunately. I mean to say that I'm not a part of your branch family. I was never a part of your branch family. Sparking Star Order's gaze narrowed, not really understanding what Lionel was getting at. Very few had connected Fluttering Star Order's actions to the appearance of Lionel that day. And only one Star Order elder had appeared, so they weren't all familiar with Lionel's face either. But, very soon, all of this confusion would be cleared up. Lionel's gaze sharpened and his disposition shifted, a slight violet hue hanging around him. Something about him exuded a heaviness only matched by a lofty mountain range. The latest _AP_SODIs are on _the website. My name is Lionel Morales. Chapter 1223. The pupils of the elders constricted. Ah, you all seem to remember now. Indeed, I was the little baby of back then, the small child you struck from your family records. You know, I have to ask. When you all chose to do that, was that because you were all afraid history wouldn't see you as villainous enough, or is there something I was missing? Lionel's eyes blinked as though he was truly waiting for an answer. However, there obviously wasn't one coming. The elders continued to stare at him, not quite knowing exactly what words they should be speaking right this moment. What are you all wasting time for? Kill him. Sparking Star Order growled. Her cane tapped the ground, sparking flames jetting outward and threatening to swallow everything. The strength she exuded was a striking dichotomy compared to a small and frail body. It was a wonder that such a small old lady could say such harsh words and even exude such great strength. Wait. An elder known as Layered Star Order stopped her. What are you doing? You need to think about this. If we really kill him, we really will lose Northern Star Order for good. Plus, back then she was already able to kill Snow Star Order and wipe their entire family line out. Even if she hasn't progressed, she isn't someone we can take lightly, and she's already aware of all of our trump cards. You can't just casually kill her grandson because you feel like it. Visit. For a better user experience, Sparking Star Order frowned, but her brows relaxed not soon afterward. How many Northern Star Orders have there been in our history? Sparking Star Order asked. Layered Star Order frowned, but still responded. 13, and how many talents on the level of Miguel has there been in that time? Layered Star Order's gaze narrowed. It had to be understood that Miguel's talent was beyond just what was known. There had been a great fanfare around his birth before Lionel overshadowed it, and that was before he gained the root of Lionel's talent. Toward this, though, Lionel's cold aura couldn't help but dispel as he chuckled. See what you did, ancestor? They think the Northern Star Order title is worthless enough for them to just blatantly ignore because of you. Wise Star Order rolled his eyes and ignored Lionel completely. He realized winning a war of words with this brat would cost more than he was willing to give. To the Star Order elders, though, Lionel's laughter carried a mocking mirth to it that those with skin much thinner than sparking Star Orders couldn't quite handle. Visit. For a better user experience Miguel's talent? Even if it was great before gaining Lionel's innate node, was it really something to brag about now, especially in front of the person that made it possible? Of course, they had no idea that Lionel wasn't laughing about that at all. As for the matters related to Miguel's talent, he didn't really care, at least he had chosen not to care. If he did, any chance of reconciling with this family would be thrown out of the window. He chose to take satisfaction in forcing them to bow their heads instead. Boy, some things in life just aren't fair. Miguel almost died the last time the innate node was transplanted. If forced to go through it again, you both might really die this time. The risk isn't worth it. In addition, Miguel's base talent cannot be transferred like yours can. The harsh truth is that the current Miguel is far beyond what you would be if you still had your innate node and is a far more worthy investment for the family. If you want to keep your life, I would advise that you stop overestimating yourself. Layered Star Order seemed to be a more neutral order, but he felt that Sparking Star Order's words made sense. What was done and couldn't be undone. In addition, if things were placed in a vacuum, he wasn't wrong either. Lionel with Scarlet Star Force wasn't worth as much as Miguel with it. That was the reality. At the same time, Layered Star Order still lived in a fantasy land where all the greatest powers of the Luxnix could come together. If Northern Star Order and Lionel could just fall in line, not to mention Lionel's mother on top of that, their charge into the 7th dimension wouldn't be impeded. Unfortunately, their planet Luxnix didn't have 7th dimensional potential. They had already cleared all of their zones and reached the peak of their powers. If they wanted to charge into the 7th dimension, they would have to launch an attack on a higher level world. They had to gather as much manpower as they could to accomplish this feat in response, though, Lionel only chuckled some more. This time, he really was laughing at the elders before him. However, before they could respond this time, he spoke. Visit. For a better user experience, you hear that, ancestor? They don't like your choice in successor. Lionel seemed to speaking to thin air. But, at that moment, the foggy form of Wise Star Order formed before the elders could question it for too long. This time, however, Wise Star Order wasn't his usual handsome self. Instead, he looked like an old man with a foot in the grave, exuding an ancient aura as he looked down upon his disappointing descendants. Huh? Does that mean Ancestor made himself look more handsome than he really was? Wise Star Order, who could easily read Lionel's thoughts, almost faltered in the sky. He was a lofty existence who had seen the corners of the universe. Why would he need to make his soul look more handsome? What good was a handsome soul without a body? He really wanted to strangle this brat to death, but he managed to refrain. 3 generations. 3 generations I asked you all to wait. If I didn't return, would you have burned my Luxnix family down to the ground? The pressure of a 7th dimensional being pressed down from above, making the Star Order elders shudder. Wise Star Order was just an empty display case, but he was a damn good one. Whether it was his aura or the prestige he had built up over generations, the elders no longer dared to take this matter lightly. I did so much for the benefit of the family that you've even taken it for granted. I will tell you all the truth. In the history of the Luxnix, there has only been a single Northern Star Order and she was destined to be far more powerful than myself. The remaining stories were all fabricated by me so that our enemies would underestimate the weight these titles held, allowing us to lay low. But, instead of cherishing this opportunity to grow as you should, you've begun to infight and are even whittling down the strength of my Luxnix family. Visit. For a better user experience, how dare you? A strong gust of wind almost pressed the elders to the ground, the rage of Wise Star Order feeling so tangible that even Lionel almost thought it was real. It is real, you little bastard. I've never suffered such a loss in my life. Chapter 12:24. Sparking Star Order's expression wavered, his irises trembling. She had never expected such a thing to happen. Of all the situations she could have thought of, this was by far the one most out of left field. The remaining elders were all stunned into silence. It was one thing if Wise Star Order was back, but it was another thing entirely for him to be exuding this kind of aura. There was only so much prestige could do for a person without the backing of strength, and there was no greater strength to the Luxnix than the seventh dimension. The truth was that the Luxnix had a few elders primed and ready at the pinnacle of the sixth dimension, prepared to break through under the right circumstances. But none of them had momentum even close to Sparking Star Order, and the worst part was that one of them was Lionel's own grandmother. Just when the elders were stuck, not knowing what to do, a violent, all-encompassing aura suddenly descended from the skies. Who dares touch my son? Despite the fact that nothing had happened to Lionel, Alienor was already enraged, seemingly sensing the volatile atmosphere and easily picking up on both Wise Star Order's aura and what remained of Sparking Star Order's flames. Bang! The valiant and overprotective mother crashed down from the skies above, not even caring to slow her descent. The elders found themselves sprawling backward. The only one who was completely unaffected was Lionel himself, as even Wise Star Order found himself been thrown back like a broken ragdoll. It was clear that this wasn't because Lionel was so strong, but rather because Alienor took special care not to harm him. The latest _AP_SODIes are on _the website. God damn it. Wise Star Order questioned his life choices once again as he was sent flying. What sins had he committed to deserve this? Wise Star Order had hardly finished this thought when he instantly thought of dozens, but in expected fashion he completely ignored these thoughts and kept feeling bad for himself. Alienor rushed to Lionel, scanning him up and down as though the slightest injury might set her off. Towards such a reaction, Lionel could only chuckle a bit bitterly. Where were you when my ex-girlfriend's dad nearly blasted my head apart like a watermelon? Of course, Lionel would never actually say these words to his mother, considering the concern in her eyes right now. She had only left him for a few hours, believing him to be completely safe since it was rare for individuals to enter the treasure vault, and even if one did, Lionel's presence likely wouldn't be questioned. But who would have thought that Lionel would actually make it all the way here? After cupping Lionel's cheeks for a third time, Alienor turned a venomous glare toward Wise Star Order, who only just managed to readjust himself. You finally decided to show yourself? Wise Star Order cleared his throat, looking toward Alienor with an incredulous expression. What was this woman going on about? Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ng experience, don't try to play ignorant with me. What did you do to my son? I swear if you harmed one hair on his head, I'll make sure that you spend the rest of your life in a fiery pit of hell. Wise Star Order looked toward Lionel, but the latter had rolled his lips over one another, holding back his laugh with as much skill as he could muster. If Alienor found out how close Lionel had been to death to just now, Wise Star Order really might be finished. Objectively, the reality wasn't all that funny. It almost cost Lionel his life. But even the most terrible things could be amusing in retrospect. This scene was the equivalent of watching a little girl reprimand her grandfather, except 10 times better. How could Lionel not sit back and watch? Plus, it was in Lionel's best interest that his mother didn't over-worry about this matter. Wise Star Order was far more useful with him than he was dead. He had a feeling that his speed of improvement would shoot up like a rocket with this schemer by his side. I what? You think we weren't aware that someone was tampering with historical records? My view of the dimensional verse might still have been shallow at the time, but my husband's scope is far larger. If talent on the level of my mother appeared all throughout Luxnix history, there would be no Viola or Montex, and the Luxnix would have entered the seventh dimension long ago. And don't give me bullshit about you doing it for the sake of the family. We're all adults here. So I'll ask you one more time. What did you do to my son? Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ng experience, Wise Star Order was speechless. Velasco indeed had a deep understanding of the dimensional verse and where talents could fall on a spectrum. After meeting his mother-in-law, he was skeptical that Northern Star orders had appeared 13 times in their history, so he immediately felt that something was wrong. Unfortunately, Y's star order had been correct. Even Velasco had no ability to see through the bronze tablet, so he didn't find Y's star order's soul. That said, he still had his suspicions. Still, there was little more he could do than warn his wife and leave behind a fail-safe measure. Eleanor lost her patience, her emerald irises glowing like two green flames. Her palm flipped over, a necklace appearing in her hands. Its chain was squeezed between her palm, its pendant dangling in the air before giving off a radiant light. Y's star order released a screech. Almost instantly, his body warped, returning to his originally handsome form that left him writhing in pain. But, what was most shocking was that within Lionel's ethereal glabella, a second screech resounded and was forcefully ejected from Lionel's forehead. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ng experience. Lionel watched on, shaking his head. This sight left him without words. Son of a bitch, the old bastard almost conned me again. Chapter 12:25. How many layers of schemes was that by now? As cautious as Lionel tried to be, he still almost fell for this old man's trap. After so many centuries, millennia even, of scheming, how could Y's star order be so simple? First he had tried to gain Lionel's trust by playing the part of amiable elder. When that was seen through, he was prepared to take over Lionel's body in a more forceful way. He then pretended to fall for Lionel's trick when in reality he had read through his junior's thoughts like a book, perfectly countering the ability of the silver tablet. After that, he ran into a roadblock with Lionel's Scarlet Star Force, but rather than giving up there, he tried to trick Lionel into a pact that really would have given him full control over him. Then, when Lionel saw through that, he already had a secondary trap laid with and was waiting for Lionel's soul to be sucked away. By then, Lionel was already 4 or 5 levels deep into Y's star order's schemes and felt that he was fine now, especially since he could read his ancestor's mind now. It could be considered an equal exchange. Or so he thought. Lionel had no idea that while he was distracted and meditating upon, getting lost in an all-new world, Y's star order's screams in his mind no longer had anything to do with his Scarlet Star Force, but were rather due to his ancestor splitting his soul in two using a technique he had snatched from the spirituals. Lionel executed with one of Y's star order's soul, but his second half was completely unfettered. Not only did this allow Y's star order to bide his time and wait for an opportunity, due to the oddities of two souls and how they could interact with, Y's star order was still able to keep bits and pieces of information hidden away from Lionel. At the same time as all of this was going on, Y's star order could slowly build up immunity to Lionel's Scarlet Star Force. With one half of his soul perfectly healthy and the other in perpetual pain, he could use the former half to continuously heal the latter half while using the latter half to deepen his comprehension. The core ability of soul manipulation was the power to allow the soul to adapt to any environment, even if that environment was an entirely new body, and Y's star order had been prepared to push this to the absolute limit. If he succeeded, not only would he be able to evolve the durability of his soul to an all-new level, but when he was finished, he could still take hold of Lionel's body and no one would be any wiser. The latest _AP_SODIes are on the website. By that time, he would have spent so long observing Lionel that he would know all of his habits, all of his quirks, all of his mannerisms. In addition, the incident with the Luxnix would be so far behind them that even if Velasco or Eleanor suspected anything, it would be unlikely to come back to him. Lionel had never thought that when Y's star order shot out of his body with just half his body left that it was because he had split himself. He had assumed that it was because of damage caused by his Scarlet Star Force, but to think he had just been outclassed like that. It was an excellent plan. Lionel couldn't say that he had been outsmarted as he would only consider this to be so if both parties had access to the same information, but he had definitely been outplayed. This ancestor of his was truly an old bastard. But he was a very smart old bastard. Lionel wasn't mad. If anything, he was just impressed, wholly so. The tenacity and grit of his ancestor was commendable. Unfortunately. You should have feared my dad more. Lionel shamelessly said these words for the second time that day. But this time, Wise Star Order truly roared into the skies, more infuriated than he had ever been before. Hey, Mom. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ng experience, Alienor, who was still enjoying torturing Wise Star Order for daring to scheme against her son, still dropped everything to give Lionel attention. If I wear that necklace, he won't be able to mess with my mind, right? Alienor blinked. That's right. This was crafted by your father. He gave it to me when he visited Void Palace a few months ago. In that case, don't kill the old man. He's very useful to me. Alienor's brow furrowed. Though this necklace worked once, with the scheming nature of Wise Star Order, what guarantee was there that it would be enough next time? For all they knew, he was already scheming something else. I know he's dangerous, but that only makes it better. If I have such a looming guillotine over my head every day, it'll always be on my toes. If one day I never have to fear schemes from him anymore, then whose schemes would I have to fear? Lionel's gaze glowed as he met his mother's eyes. Today could be considered his most humiliating display. Despite the fact his face didn't show it and he seemed quite relaxed and indifferent, smiling even, there had been a fire lit within his belly. Visit. For a better user experience, the dimensional verse seemed to want to remind him just how insignificant he was, just how worthless his accomplishments to this point had been. He had been slapped not just once today, but already too many times to count, each one more resounding than the last. He would never forget this day, he would brand it on his heart. Seeing the look in her son's eye, Alienor couldn't help but waver. She could normally bulldoze her husband into doing things her way 99% of the time. But, whenever he got that look in his eye, that unwavering gaze that met hers and felt as vast as the skies, she knew that no amount of lioness tactics would work. She took a deep breath and lowered her hand, lovingly helping her son to put the chain around his neck. You must remember to be careful, she said softly. Lionel grinned. I will. His gaze shifted past his mother, landing on the elders who were still struggling to stand, a deep fear etched into their eyes. None of them could seem to see the depth of Alienor's strength, it was simply unfathomable. Tell Miguel that he'll be taking back my innate node on the third day of the selections. I don't particularly need it. But I also don't think I need much of a reason to take back what's mine either. The latest _AP_SODIs are on the website. A deep battle intent raged within Lionel. Miguel was his better, huh? Such a thought suddenly pissed him off. Chapter 12:26. There was nothing the Luxnix family could do about it. Alienor had displayed her strength in the most straightforward way possible, and yet she hadn't spoken a single word. They all suddenly understood just what it meant to be a sector-ranked disciple. Sparking Star Order looked on blankly, her face pale to an extreme. She felt quite hollow, almost as though the hit of her lack of descendants was landing for a second time. Little lion, you're really making your mother worry, here. Alienor wrapped her arms around her son's, her face matching her words quite perfectly. She still felt uncomfortable leaving things like this. When they returned to the Void Palace, although they would both be in the same place, it wouldn't be a simple matter for her to see Lionel. Not only would she have many responsibilities to return to, but the work that would soon be dropped on Lionel's plate wouldn't be small either. Unfortunately, she wasn't her husband. She couldn't move about unhindered in the Void Palace, at least not yet. She was already worried enough about Lionel going over there, but if she had to worry about Wise Star Order as well, it was a bit much. Mom, visit. For a better user experience, Alienor's ears perked up, expecting to at least hear words of reassurance. But, what she got instead was, how'd you and Dad meet? I need ammo on the old man. Alienor was so caught off guard that she sputtered with laughter, forgetting her worry for a moment. It seemed that her son had been poorly influenced by her husband. They were always saying the most ridiculous things with the worst timing. As for Lionel, he was very serious with his question. That old man had spent years making fun of him for how often he had failed to ask Aina out. Then, just recently in the dimensional cleanse trial world, Lionel thought he was finally going to get some fatherly advice from his dad, only to find himself on the end of another joke. That said, his dad had said one meaningful thing back then in the midst of laughing at his pain. You spent 4 years chasing after that little girl. She probably thinks you'll always be there for her whenever it is she wants to come back. That was about the only useful thing he said, and he was probably right. But, the old man talked a big game. Lionel wanted to know what sort of pathetic state he really had been. The first time I met your father wasn't in a setting you would think. He was one of my mentors when I first entered the Void Palace. Visit. For a better user experience, so the old man's a groomer. This is good stuff, Mom, keep it coming. Lionel was already grinning ear to ear. This start couldn't have been more perfect. He could already think of an endless amount of ammunition from this fact alone. Eleanor laughed. Truthfully, it wasn't like that. The Velasco of back then did indeed purposely flirt with every woman he came across, about as directly opposite to his own son as you could get, but it was the kind of overt flirting that never went anywhere. There were probably a few airheads who took him seriously and fell head over heels, but Eleanor had pretty much ignored him. Our relationship remained like that for years until I became a galaxy-ranked disciple. Back then, your father was in charge of the trips we would take to the void battlefields. As galaxy-ranked disciples, you were obligated to spend at least 3 months of the year on one. Once again, I happened to be under the supervision of your father. I wasn't quite powerful enough to go off on my own like the top geniuses of our rank, unfortunately. Because Earth hadn't underwent its metamorphosis, I didn't have access to my ability, our emperor's might lineage factor, and most of the strength of the world's spirit was still sealed. But, those moments allowed me to get to know your father a little bit more. He had always been a lively man and he was able to protect me from a lot of abuses I would have had to suffer otherwise. I was lucky to have him as a protector. Damn it, Mom. Don't get lovey-dovey on me, I need ammo. The latest _AP _SODIs are on the website. Though he thought this, Lionel didn't interrupt. Still, your father and I could only be considered senior and junior at that point. He was too busy chasing skirts and falling asleep in brothels. There were at least 2 or 3 pregnancy scandals going on with him at any given time. The more Eleanor spoke on it, the more fiery her gaze became, almost as though she was thinking about ripping Velasco a new one when next she saw him. Lionel grinned. Excellent, excellent. I could never see your father in that way because of his disposition back then. Trying to change a person is a waste of time. They will change when they feel like it and never a second before. Remember, little lion, when a person shows you who they are, always be sure to believe them. Eleanor looked off into the distance, the peaceful ambience of the Lux Nix estate particularly resonating with her right this moment. Lionel gazed down at her side profile, but didn't respond directly to this. He just let it sit in his mind, rolling through his thoughts. Everything changed that day, though. Your father was so furious that the Void Palace realized that the happy and laughing mentor could actually be a madman when he wanted to. The latest _AP _SODIs are on the website. Back then, the Void Palace almost fell to its knees. It didn't make much sense. He was a domain disciple, but there were countless elders and old ancestors who had lived so much more life. But it didn't seem to matter to your father. That was the day your grandfather died and your father's fury dyed the black of the Void Palace red. Chapter 12:27. Lionel sat upon a mountain peak in silence, his conversation with his mother running through his mind. After that event, his father had become a lot more subdued and it seemed it was his mother who slowly helped him to return to a semblance of his former self. Once that fact settled in, the rest of their story practically wrote itself. The Void Palace experienced Val's fury once, they had no intention of going through it again just to enforce a dated pregnancy rule. In the end, Lionel was born and his father became a much more reserved man. What Lionel cared the most about, though, wasn't the fact his father was such a different man from himself, and it wasn't even about all the ammo he had gotten himself. It was rather about the fact that his father had chosen to aim his blade toward the Void Palace in all his rage. Even without having been there, Lionel didn't need to be a genius to understand. The Void Palace had played a part in his grandfather's death. Lionel's gaze flickered with rage, the dense rock he was sitting upon cracking beneath just the slightest intention. If that was true, he wouldn't mind finishing what his father started. Leo? Lionel blinked several times as though he was scaring his fury away. When he turned back, he found Joel standing there and couldn't help but sigh. Joel had initially thought that Lionel's fury was aimed toward him, but it was clear that this wasn't the case. He plopped down by Lionel's side, handing him a bottle of brown liquid. Even if Lionel had been mad at him, there was no way he would just turn away and leave now. It was precisely the moments where Lionel was acting the most unlike himself that he needed his brothers by his side. Visit. For a better user experience, Lionel looked at it and chuckled. You know I don't drink. Joel smiled. I know, you've always been a pussy in that regard, sipping on your little girl drinks. Hey, there's nothing wrong with a little cosmopolitan in your life from time to time. It's your loss, not mine. Lionel wasn't very surprised that the usually reserved and silent Joel was so vulgar and outgoing in private like this. Joel only spoke like this when it was only the two of them. Whenever the others were there, he'd always take the role of second in command, his actions serving to amplify Lionel's own. Lionel's shadow was quite a large one to fill. Not everyone could pull off the kind, charismatic leader role that everyone would still follow to the depths of hell well. Most would end up being too nice and lose the edge a ruler should have. So, Joel didn't try to tap dance it at all and only less loose in very rare occasions. Knowing this, Lionel couldn't continue to refuse the bottle and took a swing. But, he almost immediately began coughing. What the hell is this shit? Rubbing alcohol? Are you trying to poison me? Joel burst into a fit of laughter. It's good stuff, right? Joel threw his head back, taking 2 deep gulps. Lionel didn't know how he did it. He felt like his whole body was burning from just a single sip. He was really putting his metal body and Scarlet Star Force to shame today. He tried to keep up with Joel, but he found his vision swimming. The fogginess of his mind wasn't something Lionel had experienced before. This was definitely some strong alcohol, definitely fifth dimensional. Who knew how Joel got his hands on it? The latest _AP_SODIes are on the website. The two ended up half passed out, staring up at the sky of dusk. The day had waned on them without them even noticing. You know, man. Joel hiccuped. You let things bottle up inside you too much. I've never seen you snap like that. Lionel let out an odd cross of a laugh, cough and wheeze. It seemed like he might hack up a lung. I know. It was embarrassing, right? I didn't even know how to face you guys. There you go again. Why is that your first reaction? Everyone wanted to be there for you. I did something stupid. Everyone does stupid things sometimes, not me. Never me. It doesn't make sense. None of it makes sense. Lionel didn't even seem to be stringing together coherent thoughts anymore. If he ever remembered this night, he would definitely swear off alcohol. He liked to have full control of his faculties, and he most definitely did not at this moment. Luckily, this was one of the few times he would have such a luxury with his mother watching over him. This might be one of the last times for a long while that he could get to do this. Visit. For a better user experience, not everything has to make sense, idiot, Lionel hiccuped in response. It was hard to tell whether he registered these words or not, but what he did know was that he was very tired. He still hadn't rested since he finished his divine armor, and his head butting with Wise Star Order hadn't helped in the slightest. If Newton didn't want everything to make sense, we wouldn't have calculus. Lionel eventually said. Do you think? Newton was thinking about calculus. When he was boning his wife. He probably would have been better at it. If he did, Joel rolled over, sputtering out a swig he had taken. He coughed out his laughter, half dying and half fighting for his next breath. In his drunken state, Lionel's words were at least 10 times funnier than it should have been, and air seemed to be even harder to get. Only you. Only you would say that. Only him. Always right, well. Mr. Always. Right. Newton didn't actually have a wife, the man died a virgin. Is that the role model you want? Lionel finally didn't answer immediately. And when he did, he was half asleep. The latest _AP_SODIes are on the website. Fuck. Chapter 12:28. The days passed and the oddity of the second days of the selections ended just as oddly, with many having not a single clue how things could proceed like this with so many talents absent. However, Orinik and Ganner continued things as though nothing had happened. They simply didn't care. If these people didn't want to participate, it was their loss. This was the Void Palace they were talking about, the strongest organization of the human domain and the location where all of its talents converged. From the beginning, they weren't worried about the talents of this sector very much to begin with. In fact, now that Orinik thought about it, it was quite baffling that that woman would come to oversee things here. Usually, such a high-ranked disciple would never come to such a weak domain, as it was unnecessary. At best, they would usually bring a higher-ranked galaxy-ranked disciple along, but that was all. Orinik didn't think very much about this, though. Despite his usually meticulous and thoughtful disposition, in the years of time he had spent in the Void Palace, with so many young nobles with outstanding backgrounds and greater talent than himself around him, he had learned to not ask questions and mind his own business. In the end, when the third day arrives and many had questions about just what was happening, Orinik didn't care enough to explain things. He simply focused on his task and prepared things as he should, taking with him a list of those he thought deserved to participate. However, he didn't realize just how odd this coming day would be. And maybe odd wasn't enough to describe it. Lionel woke up with a groan, feeling as though his head might implode. It wasn't until after he used dream sense and dulled it considerably that he finally seemed capable of seeing straight once again. But, even then, that just gave him a clearer view of the sun shining down at him as though it was some sort of cannon of light. No more alcohol. Never again. Lionel had only just barely woken up when he heard a sputter of laughter. He still hadn't gotten control of all of his faculties, so he assumed he had made a mistake, but when he tried to move, he heard it again. Don't wake up the love birds, how could you be so inconsiderate? Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ing experience, he woke up on his own, just look at them. It's like a match made in heaven. I think I'm feeling a little bit jealous. Why hasn't Cap ever cuddled with me like that? His arms wouldn't be able to fit around your fat gut, aren't you asking for too much? Lionel blinked, not quite understanding what was happening. All he could feel was that burning light in his eye, and his mind was working at least tens of times slower than it normally did. Soon, though, he managed to blink enough that he could get a semblance of a look around. His head tilted and he managed to catch a few silhouettes standing nearby. Suddenly, Lionel heard a light groan and felt a shifting in his arms. At that moment, he froze, thinking the worst. He had been so numb to everything that he hadn't even noticed that there was something in his arms. When he looked down, his breath got caught in his throat. I can't. The wheezing laughter broke out like waters rushing through a crack in a dam. The silhouettes fell over in Lionel's eyes, tripping and holding onto one another as they practically hacked up their lungs. Someone tell me you got a picture. The latest _AP_SODIes are on the website. I took at least 100, but I need more. That day's look is too perfect, they really look like they're in love. Send it to me, I need it on a t-shirt, I'm never going to forget this moment. I knew Cap never drank because he'd be a terrible drunk, but I didn't expect this out of Joel too. I'm wheezing, I can't breathe. Lionel's lip twitched. The thing in his arms was precisely Joel. The two were coiled on top of one another as though they couldn't bear to let go. The greatest shame was that Joel was still asleep and Lionel couldn't even extricate himself quickly. Damn it, weren't you supposed to be the drinking veteran? How'd you let this happen? It's too much. My stomach hurts, I think I'm gonna die laughing. I've never seen Cap's face so red. Don't worry, Leo. Violet and red is a pretty good combination, you look good. I'm 100% supportive. Women are too complicated anyway, this is a marriage I can get behind. I better be the best man. Let's get purple and red suits to commemorate this day. You? Best man? No one wants to hear whatever cringe speech you'd come up with, I definitely need that. The latest _AP_SODIes are on the website. Fuck you, and you're eloquent now? Guys. There's two of them. You can both be best men. Another chorus of laughter rang out. What was maybe the worst was that even the three Lionel trusted the most had let him down. Arnold, Drake and Alan had lost their way, corrupted by the machinations of Raj, Gil, Milan and Franco. Arnold's face seemed just as stoic as ever, but the amusement in his gaze wasn't something Lionel would miss. Drake had long since covered his mouth, trying to hide his smile. As for Alan, he kept adjusting his glasses as though that would hide the twitching of his lips. Lionel realized at this moment that he'd never be able to live this down. No more alcohol. Never again. I swear. He searched for tears to shed but had none to give. The worst part was that according to his simulation, this was because the alcohol had completely dried him out. At that moment, Joel groaned and shifted in his sleep. But, he still hadn't woken up, so he just snuggled tighter into Lionel's arms before smiling contentedly. PFT. Ha 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 ha. Visit. For a better user experience. Chapter 1229. Lionel had no choice in the matter, he could only take evasive maneuvers. Escape. Laughter rang out toward his back, but he scurried away on a beam of light. His useless accomplice, Joel, still clung onto him for dear life, so he had to do the only thing he could and get rid of dead weight. Joel finally woke up when he hit the ground, looking around in confusion to figure out what was going on, a chorus of laughter becoming his only backdrop. As for Lionel, he had already vanished into the distance and down the mountain. Fuck you guys. Those words echoed from Lionel, but that only made them all laugh harder. A laughter rang out in the middle of nowhere. Lionel laughed harder than he had in a long time, his eyes finally finding the tears it needed. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ng experience, he wiped them away with a forearm, but the smile on his face didn't seem to have any intention of fading. Hey old bastard, you did that, huh? You're already so ancient, but like pulling these kind of pranks on kids, you're one sick individual. Lionel held the necklace pendant around his neck up to his face. After that day, his mother ended up sealing both halves of Y's star order into this pendant. Of course, his mother didn't allow their ancestor to fuse back into one, forcing him to remain in a weakened state with both his halves unable to communicate with the other. And yet, both halves were also now subservient to Lionel. That said, Lionel had learned his lesson already. He would never be too comfortable around this old man, no matter how chains and weights were holding him down. For all he knew, this old man had yet another layer of plans. I have no idea what you're talking about. If you have certain proclivities, don't blame it on me. Y's star order spoke indifferently. Yeah. I know it was you. You can't do anything to me, but you can definitely do something to Joel, since I never explicitly said anything other than not harming them. Either way, from now on, no more schemes against my friends. I still have no idea what you're talking about, young one. Emicham. Anyway, point me toward that treasure trove. I need to drown out this headache with riches. The latest _AP_SODIes are on the website. The lip of Wise Star Order twitched. He knew that Lionel was doing this on purpose, but there was nothing he could do about it. The location of the treasure trove was indeed close. Wise Star Order hadn't lied about that. But it was extremely well hidden, so much so that Lionel wasn't surprised that it had never been found. As shameless as Wise Star Order was, he used his own burial ground, taking advantage of the esteem and respect the Luxnix had for him to protect his things. Luckily, Lionel now had just as much free reign in the Luxnix estate as Miguel did. Now that Lionel thought about it, the second day of the selection had probably already ended and Miguel had likely returned, but the latter hadn't tried to find him. But, as far as Lionel was concerned, it didn't matter. There was only one place he could become the third day. Lionel had his own war to fight, and that he did. Entering the treasure trove Wise Star Order was like entering a field of mines. Every corner had danger and Lionel felt a close shave with death at least 3 separate times, and at least 11 other times. He was almost severely injured and managed to escape by the skin of his teeth. Lionel knew how dangerous it would be and he had even purposely not used the link between himself and Wise Star Order, making it a true game of back and forth. The fact he was also hung over only made it all the more difficult, but the smile on Lionel's face didn't fade even once. This damned brat, he's a masochist. The latest _AP_SODIes are on the website. Wise Star Order could feel that Lionel was already getting used to his type of thought process. He wasn't outsmarting Wise Star Order, rather he had done a psychological evaluation on his ancestor just based on the small amount of time they had known each other. Lionel then used his conclusions about Wise Star Order's disposition to guess what he would do next and how he would have acted. When Wise Star Order realized this, a cheeky smirk spread across his face. Little bastard, you want to get a read on me? I've spent thousands of years reforming and reshaping my character time and time again. If you think that this is enough to thwart me, you've got another thing coming. Wise Star Order didn't seem to realize that he had begun to have fun as well. It could only be said that the two men were weird individuals. One was smiling while his life was on the line and the other was grinning as he tried to take the former's life. There was no way anyone could look at such a situation and conclude anything but the fact that they were a pair of madmen. On planet Montex, a familiar young woman sat in the same spot she always had, looking off into the distance as though Lionel's mother was still there. Those around her were a bit worried as she had yet to move since those matters of several days ago, but Savon had also convinced them not to bother her. Things were better like this. After all, between being able to catch a glimpse of her through the terrace window and her locking herself up in her room, this was much better. At least this way, they could ensure that she didn't do anything stupid. The days ticked by like this and on the night before the third selection, something seemed to click. The latest _AP_SODIes are on the website. Aina's gaze regained its focus, the moon seeming just a bit brighter and a light smile spreading across her face. She rose to her feet, her hands still clutching onto the amethyst token. Her gaze seemed to radiate a meaningful thank you. As to who it was for, it was, of course, Lionel's mother. She entered the home on the mountain and vanished into the bathroom, leaving Neil, Savon and Yuri a bit at a loss. Chapter 1230. Lionel took deep and steady breaths, his body beaten and bloodied but a white smile clear beneath it all. He stood at the center of Wise Star Order's treasure trove, his wide grin shining as though it gave off its own light. All that work and you're actually so poor? You should have told me earlier. Lionel laughed. Wise Star Order's expression darkened. Poor. Even the weakest things he cared enough to keep around were of the pinnacle of the 6th dimension, with the majority being within the 7th. Though it was true that this wasn't anywhere near his best treasure trove, it was more than enough to drown out someone so wet behind the ears. What do you know about wealth? Even the 6th-dimensional things here are very unique and can't be easily found elsewhere. Even among lower-dimensional items, there will always be certain materials rarer than even their higher dimensional counterparts. What do I know about wealth? Well, do you have anything better than this? Lionel's palm flipped over, revealing a shimmering bow with a string connecting its heads that shone like crystals woven into a fiber. The twin white-maned lions on opposite ends of it seemed to roar to life, exuding a suffocating pressure that blanketed the surroundings. Wise Star Order's next words seemed to become caught in his throat. It wasn't that he had never seen a seventh-dimensional treasure before, or that he hadn't seen one at the pinnacle of the seventh dimension. The issue was, why the hell did this kid have one? It was then that Wise Star Order suddenly realized that Lionel was right. There was nothing here that surpassed this bow in value. In fact, even in terms of rarity, this bow, it was almost unmatched. Wise Star Order could immediately tell that it wasn't a normal Tier 9 gold treasure. But that only made things all the more baffling. Visit. For a better user experience, I bet that if I shot a couple arrows at you using this thing, you wouldn't be able to take it lightly, huh? Wise Star Order's lip twitched, but he seemed to refuse to answer. Lionel laughed again, tallying up 1 point in his favor. Though he had relied on his mom to do so, he finally got one up on this annoying old man. You ignorant little brat, you have no idea what you're holding. That's not a normal bow. Wise Star Order couldn't seem to take it anymore and snapped. Regardless, Lionel would have found out anyway, it was inevitable. What's different about it? Lionel asked. Do you know what's above the gold grade? Lionel fell into his thoughts. Now that he thought about it, he didn't know the answer to that question. But, at the same time, no one could really blame him for being ignorant about it either. To the Lionel of before, the seventh dimension was the highest dimension there was, at least currently. Though he had heard that Earth had eighth dimensional potential, as far as he knew, that was a matter for the distant future, since even the Morales, the pinnacle of this world, or so he thought, was only at the seventh dimension. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ing experience using this logic, he didn't think that treasures above the seventh dimension existed. Or, even if they did, they were all natural occurrences and there was no one with the skill to forge them into crafts. But, it seemed that this wasn't entirely true. What is it? Platinum? Lionel joked. I swear, I'm surrounded by idiots. Idiots everywhere. Wise Star Order shook his head. No, above the seventh dimensional gold grade are life grade weapons. They're living weapons? They have souls? Lionel's lip twitched when he thought of this, remembering how against he was weapons having souls and listening to weapons. He found it to be asinine. If there really was such a thing, it would be more than a little embarrassing. But, as soon as Lionel had this thought, he refuted it. If such a thing existed, it would be at the life grade. The spears he was using were still bronze and silver, so how could they have this soul everyone was talking about? At least for now, he was still correct. Maybe if the spear domain heirloom had life grade weapons down the line, he would reconsider his position. But, even then, he didn't really like the idea of listening to a weapon. No, they're weapons, how could they have souls? Did you flood your head with water? Lionel chuckled but didn't respond. A life-grade weapon is the equivalent of an innate node returning to nature. A weapon is usually fused of many techniques, many ores and many precious resources. When it enters the life grade, there is no longer a separation of the parts that made up the whole. Instead, it all becomes one entity sharing one breath. Visit. For a better user experience, when this happens, the weapon becomes like a natural treasure, no different from a precious metal you might unearth, and it produces its own natural force arts. As a result of this, it becomes a new existence in the world. And, much like how special forces have characteristics of their own, so too would this weapon gain its own. Much like how your Scarlet Star Force embodies destruction and skews your personality, the weapon or treasure will gain its own personality as well, but not in the most obvious, nonsensical sense. But, rather in a purer, more subtle sense. Lionel's gaze glowed. Wise Star Order only explained the raw definition to him, but when he thought about how this might translate to crafting, Lionel felt his heart speed up. If he wanted to create a life-grade weapon, what would be necessary? He would have to create a blueprint so perfect, choose materials so immaculate, and draw force arts filled with such unity that it would all blend together without the slightest imperfection. Only then would he be able to breathe life into it. Just the thought made Lionel's blood rush, a certain enlightenment opening up to him. Unknowingly, his skill as a crafter had just taken an enormous step forward just based off a few words. Then, what makes this Tier 9 gold bow so unique? Wise Star Order shook his head. I don't know who was dropped on their head as a baby and decided to give you this weapon, but if you grow in skill enough, this weapon just needs one more push to enter a perfect state of unity and enter the life grade. It's only missing a skilled enough owner. The latest _AP_SODIs are on the website. Lionel was shocked by these words before he grinned. It seemed his bow was in luck. There was no better master than him. What neither Wise Star Order nor Lionel knew was that the claiming of this bow had caused an enormous storm to kick up in Void Palace. This was a bow that had remained untouched for millennia, as the man who had crafted it was very particular about their wishes for what was to be done with it. But, as the mother lioness does, Alienor didn't follow any of those rules when she snatched it away. Who knew what would happen when others realized it was in Lionel's hands? Chapter 1231. The third day of the selection finally came, and the ambience of the arena was still quite weird and only became more so after Lionel and the people of Earth came. It seemed the fan clubs were still greatly invested into what was happening, because almost the instant Lionel showed his face, a parade of boos rang down from above. It was so deafening that the arena quaked beneath it. Lionel rubbed his nose when he saw that he was receiving such reception. There really wasn't much he could do about it. His own fan club had gone up in smoke. Or, rather, they had practically been beaten into submission, then split between the fan clubs that remained. It was a hard world out there for standums and their celebrity heroes. Man, look at that, Cap. They hate you. Never thought I'd see the day. Raj laughed. Lionel looked over toward Raj and shook his head. True to his word, the man had really gotten a shirt printed out. Lionel didn't even know how he had managed it, but Joel's dark expression spoke volumes. The man was even more quiet than usual. This actually isn't the first time I've been booed like this. Really? Really? I participated in a tournament for the Slayer Legion a few years ago and they hated my guts. Before Lionel could explain more, a strong aura descended from the skies. It was so unexpected that a hushed silence fell over the arena as they all watched a goddess descend from above. Visit. For a better user experience, Ornik and Ganner were in shock. They had just been about to start the proceedings but hadn't expected this at all. They rushed to their feet along with the other envoys, appearing before the angelic woman with their gazes glued to their feet. None of them dared to observe this woman for too long, not to mention the fact that she herself was a demoness they couldn't match up to a single finger of. She was also a sector-ranked disciple and had a husband whose name sent shockwaves through the human domain. Simply put, they liked their lives intact. The third day of the selections will be directed by me. There will only be one battle between my son and an opponent. Yes, your. Orinik was ready to agree, but his words got stuck in his throat. Her son? Who was her son? Was it someone who hadn't participated at all? Suddenly, Orinik's eyes opened wide. It couldn't be a coincidence. Her husband was. And Lionel had. Son of a bitch. The moment Orinik had this thought, he almost fainted. He hoped to God that Alienor couldn't read his mind, or else he would be finished. He swore it was a reflexive statement, really. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ing experience, it was only after Orinik remembered that they were in the same dimension that he calmed down, but even then a cold sweat had already almost drenched him out of his clothing. Alienor didn't pay Orinik and the others any mind. She waved a hand and an unassuming Miguel suddenly found himself on the stage. The envoys quickly retreated, their gazes flickering. Oh. I guess that's my cue. Lionel rose to his feet, strolling toward the center arena. His mother happened to be halfway down his path and she couldn't seem to control herself as she stopped him. She smoothed out his shirt despite knowing that it would likely be ruined quite quickly. Though she wanted to reprimand her son for wearing nothing but sweatpants and a shirt to battle without the slightest hint of an armor in sight, she shook her head and smiled instead, forcing the hearts of all those in attendance to skip a beat. She didn't say any words like be careful or protect yourself. It seemed that for this matter, she was quite confident in her son even if the entirety of the Luxnix estate was not. Off you go. Just when Lionel was about to walk past his mother, he found another silhouette behind her. He realized right then that his mother was actually an accomplice. There was no way he wouldn't have sensed such a thing otherwise, but it was already too late to do much of anything. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ing experience, Aina stood before him with an expression neither too cold nor too warm. It had been a very long time since Lionel had seen her wear a dress, and even given the circumstances, he couldn't help but feel that his breath had been taken away. The gown was a light blue and a white cloth wrapped tightly around her waist. Her slender shoulders glistened with a healthy tan, and Lionel didn't dare to let his gaze linger along her collarbone for too long out of fear for how much further down it might go. And yet, when he instead chose to look up and follow her slender, proud neck, he found the gorgeous painting that was her face. Those golden eyes didn't waver when they met Lionel's gaze, even though his own couldn't help but be flooded with guilt. They say the eyes were the window to the soul, and for Lionel, who was used to keeping his own placid, what once was a clear conscience seemed far more murky now. Aina didn't say anything. Instead, she only flipped over a palm, a bright amethyst token appearing. Lionel was taken aback. Did this mean she didn't accept his apology? Was she still angry? He couldn't blame her. Lionel didn't care what sort of history they had, but he felt like his response to her outpouring was unacceptable. He even felt he let himself down far more than he had let her down. He had done something he was deeply disgusted with himself for. You need this more than I do. The spring breeze of Aina's voice traveled to Lionel's ears, jolting his heart awake. When he saw the small smile that curled her delicate pink lips, his soul seemed to have left his body completely. There's only one man who should lead our sector to the Void Palace. The best man. Visit. For the best no_vel_read_ing experience, Lionel didn't register when Aina hand grabbed his own and placed the token within it. He didn't register the reaction of everyone around him. He didn't even register when it was that Aina had walked by him and entered the seating section of the Geniuses of Earth. He stood there in a world of his own, the token in his palm feeling heavier than anything he had ever held before. Author's note below. You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.